My own family organized an intervention to disown me for the sake of the family. Sadly, they were unaware of the covert business I owned. Hello everyone. Before we begin, a small favor? If you love this type of work, please subscribe. It's free, helps the channel, and ensures you never miss out on great videos. Okay, let's get started. Let me set the scene. My name is Alex, and I've always been referred to as the black sheep of my family. My family is all about appearance. We're talking about an entire clan that is completely infatuated with flashy objects. My parents own a network of jewelry stores where wealthy individuals may spend a year's rent on something they'll only wear twice. Jewelry is more than simply a business for them. It is a part of their personality. Apparently, I am the flaw that tarnishes their flawless image. It's not like I'm a slacker who spends his days playing video games in the basement. Far from it. I own a business that designs and customizes high-end bikes. I'm not referring to the kind you acquire in a sports goods store. These are handcrafted elegant machines with incredible attention to detail, bikes that are more expensive than some cars. My clientele? CEOs, celebrities, and collectors seeking something one of a kind. But here's the thing. I keep a fairly low profile. I do not drive flashy automobiles or wear expensive watches. My workshop isn't in a flashy office park. It's in an old industrial building that I purchased outright. My company is small, only a few individuals I trust, and we produce bikes with a 6-month wait list. My family? They are not aware of any of this. To them, I'm just the guy who prioritized his hobby over the family business. Growing up, my parents made it apparent that they prioritized achievement, money, and maintaining appearances. My older brother Ethan was groomed to take over the jewelry empire. He has the firstborn golden child idea, down to a science. My sister, Vanessa, is their pride and delight since she married into money. And then there's Daniel, the family baby who can't do anything wrong, despite the fact that he lives off the family name. I guess I was doomed from the beginning. I did not want what they wanted. They enjoyed the limelight, the continual desire to network, and the pressure to project the picture of a perfect family. I despised it. When I was younger, I'd sneak away from their silly galas and charity dinners to tinker with everything I could get my hands on. Broken radios, old motorcycles, anything mechanical. That is how I discovered my passion. As I grew older, it became clear that I did not fit in. My parents wanted me to join the family business, but I couldn't think of anything worse. Selling jewelry to people who value money over quality? No thanks. I wanted to build something with a meaning. After college, which they only paid for because they expected me to come to my senses, I began working on my bike designs. At first, it was just me in my garage, but the demand quickly rose. I invested everything I had in the business, time, energy, and money. And it paid off. My ideas began to gain traction, and I soon had clients eager to pay exorbitant fees for my work. Here's where it gets funny. My family knows I'm self-employed, yet they believe I'm barely getting by. They are unaware of my achievements since I do not brag about it. I drive a regular automobile, dress regularly, and avoid their small networking events like the plague. They see my modest lifestyle as proof that I failed. The truth is that I outperform all of them combined. My business has reached 7 figures. I have collaborations with major brands, a class that has been scheduled for months, and a reputation that is spreading worldwide. But none of that matters to them because, in their opinion, success isn't real unless it's on your wrist or parked in the driveway. The protocol is the same every time I visit them. Ethan brags about his latest strategic partnership, which is really a fancy way of stating he inked a deal set up by his father. Vanessa hints about her glamorous life, which primarily entails being a socialite. Daniel behaves like a frat dude who has never outgrown his college glory days. And me? I receive nice phony smiles and passive-aggressive comments about my potential. Are you still working on those bikes? Dad asks with a disappointed tone. Yeah, I'll reply, keeping things brief because there's no use in explaining myself. Vanessa once asked me directly if I needed help obtaining a real job. I chuckled and told her I was fine, but she gave me a look as if she had just done me a favor by proposing it. The worst aspect is that they never ask about my business. Not really. They think it's just a phase I'll go through, as if I'm a naive adolescent. It's offensive, but also sort of funny. They're so caught up in their own world, so persuaded that their way is the only way, that they don't notice what's in front of them. I kept my success to myself for a reason. I'm not hiding it. I simply don't feel the need to prove anything. My work speaks for itself, and those who matter understand the reality. My clients value what I do. My staff is fantastic, and I've created something that I'm truly proud of. I don't need their affirmation or approval, but the truth is that they aren't content to let me live my life. They've been dropping hints and subtle statements about how my actions affect the family. Not being involved in the jewelry business appears to be a form of betrayal. They act as if I owe them something, as if I'm failing to meet their expectations by not following along. Ethan cornered me at one of Mom's dinner gatherings and began lecturing me on family legacy. He literally said, "You're either with us or against us." I nearly choked on my drink. Against you? Dude, I am just trying to live my life. And then, here we are, a brief and quick text from Dad. Family meeting, 8 p.m. Be there? So I went to the family meeting expecting a lecture, maybe even a fight. I was unprepared for the circus that awaited me. I could feel the tension in the air from the moment I came in. It was like walking onto a stage with the screenplay fully written, and I was the only one who hadn't read it. My father answered the door and gave me a disapproving once-over, as if he was already upset by my existence. He did not even say hi. Instead, he simply mumbled, "You're late," and moved aside to allow me in. For context, my father defines late as anything less than 10 minutes early. So, while I was technically on time, he thought I was an hour late. I didn't bother arguing, there was no point. I just shrugged and stepped inside. The house looked precisely the same as it always did: immaculate, expensive, and soulless. Everything in it screamed, "Look how much money we have." From the huge crystal chandelier in the entrance to the immaculately set living room that nobody ever used. It was all simply a big spectacle. And speaking of the living room, that's where everyone was assembled, arranged in a beautiful little semicircle, as if they were holding a press conference. Ethan stood on one side, dressed in his regular business casual attire, as if he had just returned from a board meeting. Vanessa was sitting next to him, browsing through her phone and probably appearing to be busy. Daniel was splayed out on a chair, as if he didn't care about anything. But I knew he was enjoying whatever drama was going to develop. Then there was my mother, sitting off to the side like a worried referee, wringing her hands and giving me that tight smile she always gave when things were about to get awkward. Of course, there was my assigned chair, a single, lonely seat, positioned deliberately in the center of the room, facing everyone. It was so clear that this was an ambush that I nearly left. Almost. Dad did not waste any time. As soon as I sat down, he began his speech, emphasizing the value of family unity and heritage preservation. It was all extremely official and rehearsed. At one point, Ethan weighed in with phrases like long-term strategy and brand image, which made me roll my eyes so hard I feared they would get stuck. Vanessa wasn't far behind, commenting on how my decisions were troublesome and how they impacted on the family as a whole. She continued using terms like reputation and status, as if these were the only things that mattered. Daniel didn't say much, and he didn't need to. He was simply sitting there smirking, as if he were watching his favorite television show. I didn't say anything. I simply listened to them, nodding occasionally to give the impression that I was paying attention. To be honest, it was intriguing to see how much effort they had put into the entire process. They truly believed they were conducting some sort of intervention, rescuing me from a life of failure and shame. Finally, Vanessa handed me a folder. She slid it across the coffee table, as if she were presenting me with some sacred document. "This is for the good of the family," she remarked, her tone condescending. I opened the folder and realized how far they were willing to go. Inside were legal papers that were carefully ordered and filled with jargon I did not need a lawyer to comprehend. The gist was simple. They were cutting me off. No inheritance, no ties to the family business, and no connection to the family name. For a second, I just stared at the papers. Not because I was surprised I could see this coming from a mile away, but because it was ridiculous how serious they were taking this. They truly believed this was some sort of retribution. Dad leaned forward, his voice serious and forceful. This isn't personal, Alex. It's about business. Your actions have consequences. I raised an eyebrow. My actions? You've made choices that don't align with the family's values, Ethan stated, as if reading from a script. Vanessa nodded. It's not just about you, Alex. It's about all of us. We have to protect the family name. I wanted to laugh but didn't. Instead, I glanced through the documents, appearing to read them thoroughly. Their eyes were fixed on me the entire time, waiting for my reaction. Finally, I looked up and asked, "Where do I sign?" The room went completely silent. I don't think they expected that. My mother was the first to break the stillness. "Alex, wait, don't you think you should?" "Nope," I replied, cutting her off. "This is exactly what you want, right? To cut me loose? Let's get it over with." Vanessa blinked, apparently taken aback. "It's not about cutting you loose. It's about setting boundaries." "Boundaries," I said, smirking. "Sure, let's call it that." Dad motioned to the bottom of the page. "Just sign there." So I did. I took the pen, scribbled my name at the bottom, and returned the folder to Vanessa. She appeared unsure whether she was relieved or irritated. "Is that all?" I inquired, straightening up. Dad frowned. "This isn't a joke, Alex. One day, you'll understand that this was necessary." I nodded, having already gotten halfway to the door. "Yeah, I'll be sure to send you a thank you card when that day comes." As I went away, I could feel their gaze on my back, but I didn't glance back. They believed they were making a statement, but all they did was prove what I already knew. They did not understand me, and they never will. When I returned to my workshop that night, I felt neither upset nor defeated. Honestly, I was relieved. That family meeting was simply confirmation of something I'd known for years. I was not one of them. They had no notion who I was or what I had built, and they had no desire to find out. I turned on the lights in my workshop, and of the fluorescent lamps was more soothing than anything I'd felt while sitting in that over-decorated house. The place was my sanctuary, with walls lined with tools, shelves packed with bespoke components, and rows of partially completed motorcycles waiting for me to finish them. It was entirely mine, created with my own two hands. My helper Ben was still there, working on some late orders. He looked up when I stepped in. "Hey, how'd it go?" he inquired, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "They disowned me," I nonchalantly stated, laying my bag on the workbench. Ben blinked. "Wait, like officially?" "Yep," I answered, taking a half-finished frame from the rack and scrutinizing its welds. "Signed the papers and everything. I'm no longer part of the family." He let out a low whistle. "Damn, you okay?" I shrugged. "Honestly? Yeah. They think they cut me off, but I'm the one who's been carrying them emotionally for years. They did me a favor?" We worked in silence for a while, with the only sounds being the buzz of tools and the odd clang of metal. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I had never experienced with my family. A few hours later, I logged on to my business dashboard, and the results made me happy. Orders had skyrocketed. One of our latest designs had become popular in a niche cycling community, and suddenly, people were literally throwing money at us. Custom orders, bulk sales from international clients, and even queries from a couple of well-known brands looking to cooperate. It was overwhelming, but in the greatest way. My inbox was swamped with emails, and while the majority were business-related, a couple stuck out. One was from a journalist who wanted to write a piece about me for a lifestyle magazine. Another came from a professional rider who needed a custom bike for their next competition. Then there was the one that gave me pause. A private client offering an insane sum of money for a one-of-a-kind design. I slumped back in my chair, laughing. My family believed I was wasting my life experimenting with bikes. Yet it was more profitable than their jewelry business. The truth is, I never cared about money. Don't get me wrong. It's good to be financially secure and not have to worry about bills or debt, but that wasn't the reason I started this. I started it because I like it and wanted to make something with my hands that was both utilitarian and beautiful, something meaningful. What about the money? That was a pleasant bonus. The nicest thing was that it allowed me to keep growing without compromise. I didn't have to answer to anyone, not investors, shareholders, or my family. The following morning, I met with Josh, my business partner, at our favorite diner. Josh is the type of person who is constantly 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He is the reason we have been able to grow the firm so swiftly. All right, he murmured, sliding into the booth across from me. What is the plan? For what? I asked, as I sipped my coffee. For dealing with your family, he explained. They'll come crawling back eventually. Do you know that? I shrugged. Allow them. I'm not going to spend my time worrying about them. I have more important things to focus on. Josh smirked. Fair enough. Speaking of broader matters, we need to discuss this. He took out his laptop and showed me an email from one of our vendors. They had offered us an exclusive price on some new materials, but we'd have to commit to a larger manufacturing run than usual. Can we manage it? I asked. Easily, Josh replied. With the orders flowing in, we could treble our output while still having room to breathe. This is an obvious choice. Do it, I instructed. Josh grinned. Done. Things improved over the course of several weeks. The magazine feature debuted, and it was a game changer. The journalist produced a wonderful article about how I transformed a passion for motorcycles into a thriving business, complete with images of our workshop and some of our most popular designs. The answer was crazy. Orders increased overnight, and our social media platforms were flooded with new fans. We had to hire 2 more individuals, merely to meet the demand. Ben, who had been with me since the garage days, began teaching the new hires while I focused on developing our next major project. It was exhausting, but in the greatest possible manner. Every now and then, I would think about my family. Not in a sad or nostalgic sense, but rather with interest. I wondered if they had read the article or heard about the company. Part of me wanted to tell them simply to see how they reacted, but another part of me wasn't concerned. I was too preoccupied with creating something real, something they would never understand. One day, I received a call from a firm that manufactured high-end outdoor gear. They wanted to collaborate on a limited edition bike for their upcoming product range. It was the type of collaboration that could propel us to the next level, and I couldn't say yes quick enough. Josh and I spent weeks ironing out the details, working late nights to ensure that everything was flawless. By the time the prototypes were completed, I knew we had something unique. The launch was tremendously successful. The bikes sold out in hours, and the hype surrounding the cooperation propelled us to new heights. Suddenly, we were no longer a modest niche business. We were a brand, and during it all, my family remained mute. No call, no text, nothing. I wasn't sure if they were ignoring me or just didn't understand what I was doing. It didn't matter. Their silence did not last long. However, it began with a text. We need to talk. Urgent family matters. Vanessa was the first to break the stillness as I expected. My siblings were predictable in that regard. She enjoyed being the mediator when things got tense, but her vision of peace usually entailed ensuring that everyone regarded her as the voice of reason. I ignored it. Then came another one, this time from Ethan. Alex, let's meet. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I laughed out loud. Is there a misunderstanding? The same guy who sat there with his impeccable posture, watching me sign away my fortune, suddenly thought we had a slight misunderstanding? Yes. Sure. I did not respond to him either. The texts kept coming in over the next 2 days, each one more urgent than the last. Daniels finally arrived, but he was just as sluggish as he was. Yo, you around? Stuff's happening. Very lyrical, that one. But the one that made me pause was from my father. Come home. We need you. That's when I realized things had changed. Dad didn't ask for anything. He ordered, expected, and demanded. Come home was the closest he'd ever come to pleading. At first, I was unsure whether I wanted to answer. A part of me wanted to see how far they would go, but another part of me knew things would inevitably escalate. It was not in their habit to let things go. They required control, and I wasn't following their rules anymore. A week later, as Josh and I were at the workshop, I received a call from an unknown number. Hello, Alex, a familiar voice said, sounding unnecessarily polite. It was Ethan. We need to talk. I rolled my eyes. I got your texts. What do you want? He paused for a second, revealing everything I needed to know. It's about the family business. Ah, there it was. The family company, of course. We're having some challenges, he said. And I could almost hear the pain in his voice as he said it. It's not a great time for us, and we think you could help. I could help? I inquired, leaning back in my chair and smiled. That's interesting. Last time we talked, I was an embarrassment to the family. My choices didn't align with your values, remember? Alex, Ethan murmured, changing into his favorite condescending elder brother voice. Let's not dwell on the past. This is bigger than all of us. I laughed. No, it's not. It's about you, Ethan, and Vanessa, and Dad, and the fact that none of you have any idea how to adapt to a world that's moving faster than you are. He attempted to push back, but I cut him off. I'm busy, Ethan. If the business is struggling, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided. I wasn't good enough to be part of the family. I hung up before he could reply. That was satisfactory. Vanessa made her next move a few days later, when she unexpectedly arrived at my workshop. I was in the process of fine-tuning a bespoke build for a new client when I noticed her car pull into the parking lot. She stepped out in her luxury heels and sunglasses, as if she were walking into a nice boutique, not one where grease and metal were the major decor. I met her at the door, not trying to hide my irritation. What are you doing here? She flashed me one of her excessively polished smiles. Alex, we need to talk. I'm working, I explained, crossing my arms. This won't take long, she said, moving past me into the workshop. She looked around, evidently displeased with the ordered mess. So this is what you've been doing? Bikes? Yep, I replied, not giving anything else. She groaned and turned to face me. Look, things aren't great right now. The business is struggling, and Dad's not handling it well. Ethan's trying to hold things together, but she trailed off, waiting for me to intervene and save the day. I did not. Finally, she stated, we need you, Alex. Those comments affected her in a different way than she expected. For years, I'd been rejected as the one who didn't measure up. And now, they now needed me. What exactly do you think I can do? I inquired, leaning against one of the workbenches. You've always been good with creative ideas, she added, her tone a touch too sweet. And you've clearly been doing okay for yourself here. Okay? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She flinched, realizing her error. I didn't mean it like that. We're in trouble, Alex. The market's changing, and we didn't adapt fast enough. Sales are down, and Dad's well. He's too proud to admit we need help. But Ethan and I think you could bring something new to the table. I stared at her for a long time, letting her words linger in the air. This was Vanessa, the same person who used to mock my small project, and once told me I was squandering my talent. And now she was asking for my assistance. It felt nice. Let me get this straight, I finally remarked. You want me to come back and fix the business after everything you guys pulled? She nodded. We made mistakes, I'll admit that, but we're trying to make things right. I inclined my head, appearing to think about it. Yeah, no, I'm good. Vanessa's face fell. Alex, please. This isn't just about us. It's about the legacy. Your legacy? I corrected her. Not mine. I already have something I'm proud of. And it doesn't involve begging people to buy overpriced necklaces. Her immaculate mask slipped for a second, and I saw a glimpse of frustration. But before she could say anything else, I unlocked the door and motioned for her to exit. Have a nice day, Vanessa. Then, a week later, Dad arrived at the workshop, looking more exhausted and worn out than I had ever seen him. He didn't even bother with politeness. "We need to talk," he remarked quietly and seriously. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Do we, though?" He groaned and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Alex, I'll admit it. We were wrong about you. About everything. The business is failing. I can't fix it. Your brother can't fix it. We need your help." I stared at him for a long time, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. This was the man who had always preached about pride and reputation, and now he was virtually pleading for my help. "I'll think about it," I finally answered, moving aside to let him enter. And that's when I understood the tables had completely turned. When I promised my father I'd think about it, I didn't intend to let them off the hook. If they wanted me to salvage the family business, they'd have to work for it. For the first time in their lives, they needed to know what it was like to not have all the cards. Over the next few days, I let them stew. There are no calls, texts, or anything. I wasn't ignoring them for petty reasons. Okay, maybe only a little. I wanted them to recognize that they were no longer in control. They disowned me like it was nothing, and now they're circling back, trying to bring me on board. I wasn't going to make things simple. Josh, of course, found the whole thing amusing. "So let me get this straight," he began, leaning on the workbench as I adjusted a frame. "They need you to preserve their business, but they haven't apologized. And they certainly haven't admitted how badly they messed up." "Pretty much," I replied, smirking. "And you just let them twist in the wind?" I shrugged. "Feels fair." Josh laughed. "I wish I had your patience. I'd be sticking it in their faces every chance I had." "Oh, don't worry," I said. "They'll get what's coming, but it's not going to be on their terms." A few days later, Vanessa called again. This time I picked up. "Alex," she exclaimed, sounding too joyful. "Thank you for finally responding. I was beginning to suspect you were avoiding us." I snubbed the bait. "What do you want?" She paused, and I could tell she was trying to figure out how to word the plea she was about to make. "I wanted to check in. See if you've given any more thought to, helping out with the family business." "I have thought about it," I said. And I have a few conditions." She was silent for a moment. "Okay, what types of conditions?" "I want full control," I murmured, relishing the moment. "Here's the plan. I'll take over the business. You will continue to work as employees with no titles or power. You will respond to me." Vanessa almost choked. "Wait, complete control? Alex, that is not negotiable." I shut her off. "If you don't like it, find someone else to fix your mess." She stuttered, trying to argue, but I stood strong. She eventually promised to talk to Dad and Ethan and get back to me. My dad returned to the workshop the following day. He appeared more put together this time, but the despair in his eyes was still evident. "Vanessa told me about your conditions," he began as soon as he got in. He exhaled. "That's a hefty ask, Alex. You're asking us to hand over the firm your mother and I started from the ground up." I leaned on the workbench, crossing my arms. "No, I'm asking you to hand over the company that is failing because none of you understand how to change. If you want me to save it, you must let me do it my way. Otherwise, what is the point?" He said nothing. For a long time, I could see the inner conflict on his face. Eventually, he nodded. "Fine. You can have full control, but there's one condition," he told me. "Here we go," I mumbled. "I want you to keep the family name attached to the business," he told me. "That's all we have left." I thought about it for a bit. It wasn't an outrageous request, and to be honest, I didn't care about the name either way. "Deal," I said. The real fun began after the family reluctantly agreed to let me take complete control. I did not waste any time diving in. If they expected this to be a slow, peaceful transition in which they could dispute or second-guess my actions, they were mistaken. This was not a democracy. It was a dictatorship, and I was in charge. The first thing I did after taking over was demolish their beloved hierarchy. Ethan had been conducting operations as if he were auditioning for a reality show about dumb executives. His concept of leadership involved shouting at people when things went wrong and claiming credit when things went right. That was not going to fly. I called a staff meeting in the main office. All managers, department heads, and key personnel were invited. My family also showed up, but they seemed uneasy, sitting off to the side like school children waiting for the principal to scold them. All right, I said, standing at the head of the meeting table. Let us get one thing straight. The previous manner of doing things is obsolete. This company will now be driven by outcomes rather than nepotism. A few others looked anxiously at Ethan, who was staring at me as if I had insulted his entire being. I pointed to the whiteboard behind me, where I had outlined a clear strategy. We are streamlining everything. No more bloated budgets, superfluous overhead, or out-of-date practices. I am interested in hearing your views. If you've been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, that ends now. This is your moment to show what you are capable of. One of the managers raised their hand. And how about the family? I smirked. They will be held to the same standard as everyone else, no exceptions. Ethan scoffed, but I ignored him. Vanessa appeared to want to burrow beneath the table while Daniel was half asleep. Classic. I then tackled the stores. Half of them were losing money because they had not been updated in decades. The exhibits were worn, the layouts were unclear, and the employees appeared to be just waiting for someone to put them out of their misery. I instantly shut down the locations with the lowest performance. Some employees were disgruntled, which I understood, but I made sure to provide severance compensation and job placement aid. This was not about punishing somebody. It was about saving the organization. The remaining stores received a comprehensive renovation. I hired designers to remodel the premises, transforming them into clean, minimalist showrooms that focused on products rather than gimmicky sales practices. I also implemented a new inventory system, making it easier for customers to browse and buy, whether in store or online. Speaking of online, this was another key area where the corporation had struggled. Their website appeared to be trapped in 2005s, complete with clumsy navigation and fuzzy photos. I scrapped it all and hired a team of developers to create a new website from scratch. It was quick, easy to use, and smartphone optimized. Within weeks of launch, internet sales surged. Then came the product line. This was where I truly put my mark on things. For years, the company produced the same old designs, gaudy, costly jewelry aimed at an older audience. It was okay for the older set, but it utterly ignored younger customers, seeking something new and current. I launched a new line centered on minimalist, ecological designs. Consider exquisite items, crafted from recycled materials, with an emphasis on craftsmanship and storytelling. Each piece included a card explaining where the materials came from and how they were recycled. It was a hit. People appreciated the concept of owning something unique that didn't harm the environment. Vanessa first despised the idea. She claimed that it was too hazardous and did not meet our clients' expectations. But after the numbers started flooding in, she had to concede I was correct. Of course, not everything went well. I had to deal with a lot of criticism, especially from my own family. Ethan, in particular, seems determined to undercut me at every opportunity. He'd pull me aside after meetings and say things like, "Are you certain this is the best decision? I mean, you're new to this level of management?" I'd just smile and say, "You're welcome to step down if you believe you can't handle the changes." That typically silenced him. And Daniel? Honestly, I had no idea what he was doing half the time. He'd arrive at meetings late, if at all, and offer nothing. I eventually assigned him a tiny responsibility maintaining the company's social media profiles, which kept him busy enough without inflicting any significant damage. Despite the hurdles, the outcomes spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, the company was unrecognizable in a positive sense. Sales were up across the board, the new product lines were receiving fantastic reviews, and we'd even begun to attract younger, more tech-savvy clients. What is the best part? My family was beginning to sense a power shift. They had spent their entire lives at the top of the food chain, but now they were just like any other employee. They responded to me. One day, I arranged a meeting for just the 4 of us, myself, Dad, Ethan, and Vanessa. I wanted to make sure they knew exactly where we stood. "Let me be clear," I stated, leaning back in my chair. "I now own this corporation. If you decide to stay, you will do things my way. If you don't like it, there's the door." Dad grimaced, but said nothing. Ethan appeared to want to argue, but Vanessa placed a hand on his arm and shook her head. "I'm serious," I added. "I'm not here to continue the family legacy. I'm here to make something better. If that requires letting go of the past, so be it." For once, nobody had anything to say. The turning point came when one of the industry's largest trade exhibitions encouraged us to present the new collection. It was the type of event that could make or destroy a company's reputation, and I was determined to leave an impression. I designed the booth myself, providing a sleek, immersive experience that emphasized the company's sustainable innovations while also telling the tale of its transformation. My family was present, of course, but this time I was the star of the show. Customers, journalists, and industry experts rushed to our exhibit, admiring the new approach and questioning how we'd turned things around so rapidly. I made every effort to give credit where it was due, particularly to the staff who had worked tirelessly to make it happen. As I saw people admire the pieces I helped make, I felt a surge of pride that I had never felt before. This wasn't just about preserving a business. It was about showing to myself, and to them, that I was capable of far more than they had previously given me credit for. By the end of the show, we had secured several new collaborations, and the brand was more popular than ever. My family was finally realizing that I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was leading the charge. Then one day, it occurred. This was the moment I had been waiting for. We had just finished a quarterly review meeting, and I had delivered some of the best data the company had ever seen. My father cleared his throat just as I was about to finish the lecture. "Alex," he whispered, his voice as gentle as I had ever heard it. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. You have accomplished something that none of us could have done. You did more than just salvage the business. You improved it." The room became silent. Even Ethan and Vanessa appeared astonished. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Vanessa joined in. "Dad is right. We should have seen your potential sooner. You've taken this company to places we never imagined possible." Ethan nodded, grudgingly. "You proved everyone incorrect." I can't admit that. It was weird to hear them admit it out loud. "We've been talking," Dad said, looking at the others. "We'd like to fix things. Not just the business, but us, the family." There it was, the apology and the olive branch. I sat back in my chair, allowing their comments to hang in the air for a minute. "I appreciate that," I said. "But let's be honest, you didn't want me in the family until I proved useful. That is not something I can forget." Vanessa looked down, obviously uncomfortable, but she did not object. "I'm not interested in pretending things are fine. Our current system is functional. We're working together, and that's it. I don't need anything else." Ethan frowned. "Come on, Alex. We are family. We made mistakes, but we're striving to make things right. You're trying to make it right, because you have no choice," I responded calmly. "If this firm had failed, you would not be here today. Let us not change history." Dad seemed to want to argue, but then sighed and nodded. "Fair enough. Here's the deal," I explained, rising up and gathering my notes. "I will remain operating the firm, and you will continue to do your tasks. But aside from that, we're okay where we are. No more pretending to have a happy family. We tried that, but it didn't work." When I left the meeting, the room was quiet, but I didn't feel awful about it. I wasn't angry, nor was I resentful. I knew exactly where I stood, and I was not going to let them cross that line again. My jealous sister accused me of being a gold digger and tried to ruin my boyfriend's career. My parents took her side as always. Hello everyone, I don't know where to start. I suppose I've always been the other sister. My name is Lindsay, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in the shadow of my older sister, Melanie, who is now 34. It feels like my entire life has been spent trying to measure up to her, but I never could, at least not in my parents' eyes. Melanie has always been the golden child. I recall as a child seeing how easily everything appeared to fall into place for her. She was the star of every school play, the captain of her soccer team, and the straight, a student who my parents couldn't stop talking about. Meanwhile, I was simply Lindsay, the quiet one, the girl who enjoyed drawing in her sketchbook but did not shine in the ways that mattered to them. It wasn't as if I hadn't tried. I put myself into art because it was the one thing I thought I was good at. But even that wasn't enough. I recall one particular day well. During a parent-teacher conference, my middle school art instructor informed my mother that I had true talent, and that if I worked hard enough, I might be able to receive a college scholarship. I felt very proud and excited. But when we arrived home, my mother replied, "That's nice, honey, but it's not like art is a real career. Melanie's already studying for the SATs. Maybe focus on something practical." This shattered me. I was 12. I did not wish to be practical. I wanted them to be proud of me, even if it was for reasons other than Melanie. But the favoritism did not end there. My parents gave Melanie every possible benefit. They paid for her piano lessons, individual tutoring, and pricey summer camps, which she didn't appear to like. When it came to me, however, the funding was tight, or so they claimed. I asked for painting lessons, even cheap ones at the community center, but they always answered, "No, we just can't afford it right now, Lindsay." They did, however, manage to finance a new car for Melanie when she reached 16. Regarding that car, here's a story that still makes my blood boil. On my 16th birthday, I convinced myself that this was finally my time. If Melanie gets a car, maybe they'll surprise me with one as well. Instead, I received a sweater. A sweater? I'm not ungrateful. I understand not every child gets a car, but what about the kicker? Melanie arrived home from college with a flat tire. And guess who got to wait and watch my father spend hours mending it, while my birthday cake lay untouched on the counter? Happy birthday to me. And it's not simply the material aspects that sting, it's the emotional neglect. My mother constantly praised Melanie, saying things like, "You're so beautiful, you're so smart, and you're going to do amazing things." I can't remember the last time she said that to me. I was ecstatic to get my first job at a tiny graphic design agency, but my mother's response was, "That's nice, but when are you going back to school?" You know, Melanie got her master's degree. I tried talking to my father about it once. He's quieter than my mother and more passive. I asked him why it seemed like they loved Melanie more than me. He groaned, looked uneasy, and continued. "We don't love her more, Lindsay. She just needs us more." What the heck does that even mean? Is she in more need of them? She had everything handed to her. If anyone required assistance, it was me. As I became older, the gap between us widened. Melanie went on to greater and better things. An Ivy League degree, a high-paying job in finance, and a sparkling engagement ring from her equally beautiful fiancé. And me, I felt stuck. My art career didn't take off as I had hoped. And every time I saw my folks, they'd say, "So, what's next?" As if what I'd done so far wasn't enough. One of the most humiliating experiences occurred last Thanksgiving. Melanie and her fiancé, Jason, came over for supper, and my parents went all out prime rib, fine wine, the works. I brought a pumpkin pie that I had made myself, which I was very proud of considering. I am not much of a cook. When I placed it on the table, my mother gave me a tight little smile and said, "Oh, sweetie, that's nice." But Melanie brought a cheesecake from that bakery downtown. Everyone loves their desserts. Guess which one was devoured first? Melanie not only receives all of the adulation, but she also appears to ignore it. She pretends not to notice the partiality, but I believe she enjoys being the center of attention. Years ago, I tried to confront her about it. I told her it was unfair that Mom and Dad treated us differently. She stared at me with wide-eyed innocence and said, "Lindsay, you're being ridiculous. Mom and Dad love us equally." Then she turned around and uploaded a picture on Instagram with the remark, "My parents are the best," over a shot of the new watch they bought her, just because. I feel as if I've been gaslit my entire life. Every time I try to express my feelings, I am met with either denial or sympathy. "You're overreacting, Lindsay," or, "Oh, you poor thing," as if I were a frail little flower incapable of handling her feelings. It is exhausting. I've been growing increasingly distant from my family. I stopped coming to family gatherings and called my mother solely to learn about Melanie's recent successes. I've been focusing on my painting again, attempting to rekindle the passion I had as a child, before their relentless comparison drained everything from me. But it's hard. No matter how much I try to remove myself, that voice in the back of my head continually screams, "You'll never be good enough." I guess what I'm wondering is, am I crazy for feeling this way? Is it inappropriate to want my parents to see me for who I am rather than who I am not? Or am I doomed to live the rest of my life in Melanie's shadow? After years of feeling stuck, I eventually discovered what I considered to be a nice place. I'd been working as a freelance graphic designer, gradually developing a portfolio that I was proud of. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I adored it. For once, I felt in charge of my life, free from incessant comparisons to Melanie. That's when I met Zach. It was a random meeting at a small business exhibition that I attended to network. I was standing awkwardly near a kiosk, browsing through leaflets, when he approached me. He was tall, with dark hair that had just the proper amount of gray at the temples, and he exuded effortless confidence, which I noticed straight away. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he replied, smirking. I laughed, slightly ashamed. Is it that obvious? He presented himself as Zach, the founder of a modest but thriving technology startup that creates software for small businesses. As we talked, I discovered that he was 36, self-employed, and had created his business from the ground up. Zach, unlike many of the folks I'd met at these occasions, was neither pretentious or overbearing. When I explained about my business, he listened and asked questions about my design process and the types of clients I dealt with. It felt refreshing. We kept in touch for a few weeks. Zach was more than just nice and charming. He was intelligent, ambitious, and truly interested in what I had to say. He asked me to create some branding materials for his company, and working with him was fantastic. He treated me as an equal, which was unusual for me after being dominated by Melanie for so long. When Zach and I started dating, it felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I felt recognized, not as Melanie's sister or the less successful daughter, but as Lindsay. He wasn't concerned about my family dynamics or the baggage I carried. He cared for me. Of course, Melanie had to spoil it. At first, my parents appeared cautiously enthusiastic about Zach. They loved his success, though my mother couldn't help but make snarky remarks like, "Well, he's a bit older, isn't he?" Or, "I hope he's serious about you." Melanie, on the other hand, despised him from the start. I should have seen it coming. Melanie delights on being the center of attention, the one everyone envies. Zach's accomplishments made her feel threatened. She couldn't believe I'd found someone who was not only nice and helpful, but also extremely accomplished in his own right. So, in classic Melanie flair, she sought to instigate drama. It began quietly. Melanie mentioned during a family meal how handy it was that I met Zach while working on a project for him. "So did you land the guy and the client?" She joked loud enough for everyone to hear. I attempted to shrug it off, but the inference was clear. She assumed I was just dating Zach for his money. Things swiftly escalated after that. Melanie began spreading tales throughout our family, claiming that Zach was some type of sugar daddy. She even told my parents that I was exploiting him to escape my dismal career. "I just think Lindsay's rushing into things," she'd say, pretending to worry. "It's not like she's ever dated someone like Zach before." You have to admit, it's a big step up. What is the worst part? My parents believed her. My mother confronted me one night after dinner. "Lindsay?" she asked, her tone concerned. "Are you sure Zach is the right man for you? He's so established. I just don't want you to get hurt if this doesn't work out." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Zach and I are happy. Why can't you just let me have this?" Mom hesitated. "It's just Melanie mentioned some things." "Of course she did," I added, "because Melanie can't stand it when the attention isn't on her." I stormed out that night, but the damage had already been done. The seeds of mistrust had been sowed, and no matter how much I defended myself, it seemed as if my family had already made up their minds. The rumors did not end with my family. Melanie began sharing them around mutual friends, people the first hadn't spoken with in years. One day, I received a phone call from Sarah, an old high school classmate I hadn't spoken with in years. "Hey, Lindsay," she said nervously, "I just wanted to check in. I heard some things about Zach and wanted to make sure you're okay." "Wait, what things?" I inquired, puzzled. Sarah hesitated. Well, Melanie mentioned that Zach might be controlling. She said you've been spending all your time with him and barely talking to your family anymore. I just wanted to make sure everything's all right. I was infuriated. Sarah, that's not true. Zach is nothing like that. Melanie's just eye paused, recognizing there was no use in explanation. Melanie had already caused harm. When I challenged her about it, she claimed to be the victim. I was just worried about you, she explained, wide-eyed and innocent. I didn't mean for it to get blown out of proportion. You know how people love to gossip. You're the one who started the gossip, I yelled. Why can't you just be happy for me for once? Melanie didn't care. She never does. All she cared about was bringing me down and keeping me in the shadow, where she believed I belonged. Throughout it all, Zach was my rock. Lindsay, he remarked one night as we sat on his couch, you don't owe anyone an explanation for our relationship. Not your parents, not Melanie, not anyone. The people who really care about you will see the truth. He could see how much it was hurting me and did everything he could to encourage me. I wanted to believe him, but it was difficult. Melanie's falsehood made me feel increasingly lonely. Even some of my closest friends became distant, as if they didn't know what to think. It seemed like I was waging a lost battle while Melanie was winning. But Zach was correct in one thing. Those who genuinely cared about me stood by my side. My best friend Emily was among them. When she heard what Melanie was saying, she quickly called me. Lindsay, this is ridiculous, she said. Anyone who knows you knows you're not that kind of person. Melanie's just jealous. She can't stand that you're happy. Hearing those words meant more to me than I could convey. For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Zach, for his part, refused to be swayed by the reports. If anything, they only strengthened us. He saw through Melanie's tactics and refused to allow her harm our relationship. She can say whatever she wants, he told me. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is us. He was correct. Melanie could spread as many stories as she wanted, but she couldn't take away what Zach and I had created together. For the first time in my life, I wasn't simply Lindsay, the other sister. I was Lindsay, the woman who had found love and happiness, despite everything Melanie had thrown at her. I used to believe that things couldn't get worse, following Melanie's initial rumors about Zach. I was mistaken. Melanie wasn't simply out to ruin my family's opinion of me. She launched her campaign on social media, dragging my name through the mud for all to see. It began softly, as many of Melanie's shenanigans did. She shared a photo of herself and her husband Jason in front of their huge suburban home. The headline read, "It's amazing what you can achieve with hard work and dedication. Some of us don't need shortcuts." I realized it was about me. The timing was absolutely great. Zach and I had just shared photos from a weekend trip to Napa Valley, which Melanie would have undoubtedly seen. I attempted to ignore her posts, but they got more pointed. A few days later, another photo showed her holding an expensive handbag with the message, "Bought this with my own money because, you know, some of us don't rely on others to fund our lifestyles." The worst one, however, was a photo of her standing in her garden with a smug smile, holding a coffee cup that read, "Girl Boss." The caption, "It's amazing how some people will do anything for a free life." Her friends and acquaintances chimed in, some even tagging me directly in their replies. I was upset, but I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her publicly in order to defend myself, but Zach urged me otherwise. "She's baiting you?" he remarked. "If you respond, you're giving her exactly what she wants." He was correct, of course, but that didn't make things any easier. Every time I opened my social media, there it was. Her smug expression, passive-aggressive captions, and army of accomplices. It felt like she was waging war against me, and I didn't even have a weapon to defend myself. A few weeks later, things escalated during a family meal. My parents had invited everyone over for what they called a relaxing evening. I should have known better. Nothing about being in the same room with Melanie could possibly be relaxing. Melanie was on edge from the time Zach and I stepped in. She welcomed us with a phony smile and an overly bright, "Oh hi, you two." But her tone was tinged with sarcasm. She hardly acknowledged Zach, instead concentrating her entire attention on Jason, making a huge deal of questioning him about his career, their forthcoming vacation, and his plans to remodel their already exquisite kitchen. Dinner began uneventfully enough. My mother had prepared one of her hallmark dishes, roast chicken with all the fixings, and the discussion was primarily small talk. However, Melanie, ever the limelight seeker, felt it was time to stir the pot. She leaned back in her chair, whirling her wine glass like a villain from a soap opera, and said, "You know, it's funny. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and she mentioned how some people are living the dream of all money hunters." The table became silent. My father coughed awkwardly. My mother gave Melanie a warning glance, but she disregarded it. "I mean," she continued, her gaze riveted on mine, "imagine finding someone who's willing to pay for everything. Your vacations, your lifestyle, even your career must be nice. Right?" Zach stiffened alongside me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I wouldn't let her see me crack. "Are you trying to say something, Melanie?" I inquired, keeping my voice as quiet as I could. "Oh no, of course not," she responded innocently. "I'm just making an observation. Some people have all the luck." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Zach interrupted, his voice low but forceful. "Lindsay works hard, and she doesn't need to rely on anyone to support her." Melanie smirked. "Oh, I'm sure she does. I mean, graphic design is such a stable and lucrative career path. I'm sure you don't help out at all, right? Enough." My mother's voice sliced through the tension like a dagger. "Melanie, stop it. This isn't appropriate." But Melanie wasn't done. She slammed her glass down with a bit too much vigor, the sound reverberating around the room. "I'm just being honest, Mom. Isn't that what we're supposed to do as a family? Be honest with each other?" I could not handle it anymore. I sprang up so rapidly that my chair almost crashed over. "Honesty? You wouldn't know honesty if it hit you in the face. All you know how to do is tear people down, because you can't stand it when the spotlight isn't on you. Lindsay, don't, Zach murmured calmly, placing his hand on my arm. But I was beyond the point of caring. Do you know what your problem is, Melanie? I asked, my voice quivering with wrath. You can't stand the fact that someone else might actually be happy for once. You thrive on making other people feel small, because that's the only way you can feel big. Melanie's face flushed hot, but she did not answer. My father said something about everyone needing to calm down, but I didn't want to hear his half-hearted attempts at mediation. I grabbed my coat and turned to face Zach. Let's go. We went without saying anything, the tension in the room so heavy that I felt like I was suffocating on it. I burst into tears as soon as we arrived at the car. I can't do this anymore, I wept. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when she's destroying my life. Zach drew me into his arms, his words calming. You don't have to. You don't owe her, or anyone else in your family, anything. You've worked hard for what you have, and you don't need to justify it to anyone, least of all Melanie. He was correct, of course, but as much as I wanted to wipe Melanie out of my life entirely, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. She was more than just my sister. She was my parents' darling, the golden child. Cutting her out would also mean cutting them out, which I wasn't sure I was prepared for. The next few days were a jumble of emotions, rage, despair, and frustration. I blocked Melanie on all social media platforms, not wanting to see any more of her passive-aggressive posts. But the damage had already been done. Friends and acquaintances who had seen her posts were immediately asking questions, their tone tinged with thinly veiled condemnation. You're not actually dating him for his money, are you? One of them questioned me directly. No, I snapped. I'm not. But the stories lingered, and Melanie's shadow became larger than ever. No matter how hard I tried to get away, it felt like she was always one step ahead, ready to drag me down. After that horrible family meal, I knew I couldn't keep putting myself through Melanie's games. Every interaction with her seemed like a landmine about to detonate, and I was done falling into her traps. Zach and I talked about it, and we both agreed I needed to take a step back for my own sanity. I needed to set some boundaries, even if it meant missing family occasions. The first test came a few weeks later, when my parents said they would be having a cookout. It'll be fun, my mother stated over the phone, her tone far too enthusiastic. Jason and Melanie are coming, and you can bring Zach. We haven't seen you two in ages. I paused. I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. She heaved an impatient sigh that made me feel like a troublesome child. Oh, Lindsay, don't be like this. It's just a little barbecue. You're not still upset about what Melanie said, are you? Are you still upset? I asked incredulously. Mom, she basically accused me of being a gold digger in front of the whole family. And that's not even mentioning all the crap she's been posting online. Mom dismissed it with a giggle. Oh, honey, you know how Melanie is. She doesn't mean half of what she says. You two just need to talk things out. No, Mom, I replied firmly. What I need is for her to stop attacking me every chance she gets. Until that happens, I'm not going to any event where she's present. There was a prolonged pause. Finally, she remarked, well, I think you're overreacting, but if that's how you feel. It wasn't the answer I was hoping for, but she didn't go any further. Zach and I spent the weekend hiking instead, enjoying the solitude and quiet of the trails away from Melanie's toxic presence. But my absence was not unnoticed. A few days later, my father called, his tone pleasant, but with that hint of disappointment I'd heard so many times before. Lindsay, your mother told me you didn't come to the barbecue because of Melanie. Is that true? Yes, Dad, I said, bracing myself for the scolding I knew was coming. Lindsay, he replied. She's your sister. Families fight sometimes, but that doesn't mean you just walk away. Your mom and I raised you both better than that. I felt a knot form in my throat. Dad, this isn't just a fight. This is years of Melanie tearing me down, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. I have to protect myself, he exhaled. I get that you're upset, but don't let this destroy the family. You two need to find a way to work things out. Destroy the family? The words struck me like a punch in the gut. It was the same guilt trip strategy my parents had used throughout my life to keep me in line, and I was sick of it. I'm not the one destroying the family, Dad, I murmured, my voice trembling. If you want to blame someone, blame Melanie. However, he did not. He never would. Over the next 2 months, I stuck to my decision. I denied any invitations from my parents to events attended by Melanie. Let us know when you're hosting something without Melanie, I'd propose. They never did. Every time I turned them down, they'd say I was being harsh. Melanie was doing her best, and I was letting a minor misunderstanding destroy everything. What they didn't realize, or refused to recognize, was that this was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of conduct that had persisted throughout my life, and I was not going to continue submitting myself to it, merely to keep the peace. The distance from my family was difficult, but it also allowed me to focus on myself. I immersed myself into my business, accepting new clients and developing my portfolio. Zach was my biggest supporter, always there to encourage me and remind me of my worth when I was doubting myself. Slowly but steadily, I began to feel like I was reclaiming my identity. Lindsay, the artist, the partner, the woman who did not want her family's approval to be complete. Melanie, on the other hand, was not satisfied with the status quo. One afternoon, my dearest friend Emily called me. Hey, have you seen Melanie's latest post? She inquired, her tone tinged with alarm. No, I replied, my stomach sinking. What did she do now? Emily hesitated. She posted this picture from your parents' anniversary dinner, and the caption said, some of us actually show up for our family. Watch your family first. I groaned. Unbelievable. She can't stand that I'm not playing her game anymore. So now she's trying to make me look like the bad guy. Emily sighed. I know it's hard, but don't let her get to you. You're doing the right thing by setting boundaries. I wanted to believe her, but guilt was gnawing at me. Every time I saw a picture of my family without me, every time I heard my mother's disappointed tone or my father's angry sighs, I felt as if I had failed them. It didn't matter that I was defending myself. Part of me still craved their acceptance and validation. The breaking point occurred a few weeks later, when my parents asked Zach and me to supper. "It'll just be the four of us," Mom said. "No, Melanie, no drama." I reluctantly agreed. I wanted to believe they were finally listening to me and understanding where I was coming from. However, when we arrived, there was a fifth-place setting on the table. My heart fell. "Please tell me that's not for who I think it is," I requested. Before my mother could respond, the doorbell rang. Melanie strolled in moments later, smiling. "Oh, Lindsay, I didn't know you'd be here," she remarked, her tone full of feigned astonishment. I turned to my parents. "Are you serious? You lied to me." "Lindsay, please," Mom begged. "We just thought, if you two spent some time together, you could work things out." I shook my head, tears of fury and betrayal welling up in my eyes. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not the problem here, she is." Melanie gasped and clutched her chest in mock indignation. "Me? What did I do?" I could not handle it anymore. "You know exactly what you did, Melanie. You've spent our entire lives tearing me down, and I'm done pretending it's okay. I'm done being your punching bag," she smirked. "Oh, please, you're so sensitive, Lindsay. Maybe if you stopped playing the victim all the time, people would actually take you seriously." That was it. I grasped Zach's hand and turned to face my parents. "If you can't respect my boundaries, then I can't be part of this family anymore." My mother started to cry. My father seemed to want to say something but didn't know what. Melanie simply stood there, looking as smug as ever. As we walked out, Zach squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," he replied. I wanted to believe him, but all I could feel was grief. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, life was peaceful. Zach and I had discovered a rhythm together, a kind of sanctuary away from the drama that my family was continually causing. I was still separated from my parents and Melanie, but I felt no remorse. I'd spent too much of my life bending over backwards to please them. I was now focused on my own happiness. When Zach proposed, their happiness increased tenfold. We were on vacation and stayed at a beautiful home on a remote island. It was the kind of paradise I could only imagine. Pristine beaches, lush foliage, and a villa straight out of a tourist brochure. Zach planned the entire vacation as a surprise for our 2-year anniversary. He urged me to pack my luggage, but didn't tell where we were going. Just that it would be exceptional. The proposal took place on the second night, following a romantic dinner on the balcony facing the ocean. As the sun sank, the sky turned orange and purple, and the sound of waves breaking against the shore provided the ideal backdrop. I was savoring the scenery when Zach abruptly dropped to one knee, clutching a little velvet box in his palm. "Lindsay," he replied, his voice steady but full of passion. "The last 2 years with you have been the happiest of my life. You have shown me what it means to truly love and be loved. I hope to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" I was so overwhelmed that I could barely speak. As I nodded, tears flowed down my cheeks, and my heart felt like it was about to burst with excitement. Yes, I eventually managed to say, "Yes, of course, I'll marry you." The ring was stunning, a basic yet elegant design featuring a single diamond that glittered like the stars above us. It wasn't gaudy or over the top, and I appreciated that Zach had chosen something so perfect for me. We spent the remainder of the evening partying, sipping champagne beneath the stars, and fantasizing about our future together. For once, I felt like my life was mine, not defined by my family's expectations or Melanie's shadow, but by the love and pleasure I'd created with Zach. When we returned from our trip, we began arranging the wedding. Neither of us wanted anything large or ostentatious. We both preferred closeness over show. We settled on a small ceremony with only 25 guests, close friends and family members who had been supportive of our relationship since the beginning. Melanie was clearly not on the guest list. My parents' invitation required a more hard decision. I struggled with it for weeks, divided between wanting them to be there and fearing the drama they may cause. Finally, I decided to accept them, but I made it clear that if they brought Melanie as a guest, they would be instantly uninvited. "This is my day," I informed them honestly. "I'm not going to let her ruin it." The site was ideal. A quaint winery secluded in the countryside with rolling hills and scenic views. The wedding would be held in an outside garden, followed by dinner and dancing beneath a canopy of fairy lights. Zach and I collaborated closely with Amanda, a wedding planner who helped us bring our vision to life. She was a godsend, keeping things on track and making sure no details were neglected. Of course, Melanie learned about the wedding. I'm still unsure how. My parents said they didn't tell her, but I wouldn't put it past them to accidentally reveal it. Once she knew, the sabotage began. It all started with rumors. Melanie called up extended family members who hadn't been invited, explaining that I had purposefully excluded them because I thought I was too good for the family. She informed one cousin that the wedding was being held at a fancy, costly vineyard, and that I was wasting Zach's money like it was going out of style. "She's always been jealous of me," Melanie allegedly stated. "This whole wedding is just her way of trying to one-up me." I learned about the rumors from my Aunt Karen, who contacted me one evening, apparently disturbed. "Is it true, Lindsay, that you are not inviting anyone from your family except then your parents?" she asked. "Aunt Karen, that's not true," I exclaimed, my wrath boiling over. "We are having a simple wedding, that is all. It's not about excluding somebody. It's about maintaining intimacy." "Well, Melanie's been saying some things," she admitted. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her for the heads up and hung up, my hands quivering in anger. Zach spotted me pacing the living room and grumbling under my breath. "She's unbelievable," I complained. "She's spreading lies about me to the entire family, just because I didn't invite her to my wedding." Zach wrapped his arms around me. His calm presence grounded me. "Let her say whatever she wants," he muttered. "The individuals that matter understand the truth. Do not let her steal your joy." He was correct, of course, but it didn't make things any easier. Melanie's rumors sparked a chain reaction, and I soon found myself getting calls and messages from distant relatives demanding to know why they hadn't been invited. It was exhausting, but I wouldn't let it impede my plans. When the wedding day arrived, I was a bundle of jitters. Not because of Melanie. Amanda had informed me that the venue had strict security measures in place and that no unauthorized guests would be admitted. But because I wanted everything to be flawless. As I stood in the bridal suite, looking in the mirror, I felt a sense of peace come over me. My gown was simple but lovely, a flowing line with delicate lace embellishments and a soft champagne color. My dearest friend, Emily, stood alongside me, smiling as she adjusted my veil. "You look incredible," she replied. "Zach's going to lose it when he sees you." The ceremony was all I had imagined it would be. As I came down the aisle, my heart leapt when I saw Zach waiting for me, his eyes full of love and pride. We exchanged meaningful and highly personal vows. And when we said "I do," there wasn't a dry eye in the yard. The reception was equally as wonderful. The meal was exquisite, the wine flowed freely, and the dance floor was filled with laughing and happiness. My parents behaved appropriately, though I could sense my mother was uncomfortable without Melanie. Still, for once, the spotlight was on me, not on family conflict or sibling rivalry, but on the love Zach and I shared. As the night came to a close, I found myself sitting with Emily and a few other close friends, reminiscing on everything that had led up to this point. "You did it," Emily remarked, raising her glass in toast. "You stuck up for yourself and achieved pleasure. That is what matters." Following the wedding, Zach and I hoped Melanie would finally leave us alone. But of course, that was too much to ask. Instead, her toxic behavior worsened. She began spreading even more ridiculous accusations, not only about me, but also about Zach. According to Melanie, Zach had a history of dominating his partners, had been sued for fraud in the past, and was using his fortune to influence me into separating from my family. Of course, it was all falsehoods, but the sheer arrogance of it was terrible. The worst aspect was that her lies began to damage Zach's professional reputation. One of his business associates, Mark, called him to inquire about the lawsuit. At first, Zach was perplexed. But when Mark mentioned that he had learned about it through a mutual acquaintance, it was evident that Melanie was the source. This was the last straw for Zach. He was not the kind to exacerbate situations unnecessarily, but this wasn't simply petty family drama anymore. It was defamation, and it was beginning to harm his livelihood. Zach decided to pursue legal action. He contacted his lawyer, Andrea, a no-nonsense woman who had handled his business contracts for many years. Andrea acted quickly when Zach explained the problem. "We'll draft a cease and desist letter immediately," she told me. "If she doesn't comply, we'll escalate to a defamation lawsuit." The letter was mailed a few days later. I hadn't seen it, but Zach assured me that it was clear and left no room for interpretation. It detailed all of Melanie's fraudulent assertions, requested that she stop making defamatory statements immediately, and warned that failing to comply would result in legal action. Zach's tone when discussing it was calm but forceful. "This isn't just about us, Lindsay," he told me. "People like Melanie won't stop unless forced to. She needs to learn that her actions have repercussions." Melanie did not take it well, as one could expect. The day after she received the letter, she called my mother in tears, accusing Zach of bullying her and attempting to destroy her life. My mother, of course, called me right away, her voice filled with guilt-tripping concern. "Lindsay, what is happening?" "Melanie claims Zach is threatening her with a lawsuit. Isn't that a little extreme?" "She's lying, Mom," I responded, attempting to remain cool. "Zach's not threatening her. He's urging her to stop telling lies about us. She, not him, is ruining people's lives here." "But she's your sister," my mother explained, as if that justified everything. "Can't you two talk it out?" "No, Mom," I snapped. "We tried that, and it obviously didn't work. This is more than simply family conflict. She's breaking the law. If you don't comprehend that, perhaps you're part of the problem." Mom didn't say much after that, but I knew she still supported Melanie. It stung, but by this stage, I was used to it. Melanie's life began to fall apart as the legal pressure increased. Her toxic behavior had alienated many of her friends over the years, and this current incident appeared to be the last straw for a few of them. I heard through the grapevine that numerous people had cut ties with her because they were tired of the continual manipulation and drama she introduced into their lives. Sarah, one of her closest friends, reached out to me. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for ever believing Melanie's lies," Sarah told me. "She's been saying nasty things about you and Zach for years, but now I realize it's all envy. She's toxic, and I can't be around her any longer." It was reassuring to hear, but also heartbreaking. Melanie had always been surrounded by people who adored her, yet her actions had caused her to lose many relationships. Now those bridges were crumbling one by one. She was also struggling financially. Jason, her husband, had lately lost his job, and without it, they were struggling to keep up their extravagant lifestyle. Melanie refused to downsize, claiming they could wait it out, but debts were piling up. Credit card debt, house bills, and the expenditures of living the fashionable lifestyle were catching up with her. Eventually, everything came crumbling down. Jason petitioned for divorce, alleging irreconcilable differences. According to what I heard, he had gotten tired of her continual desire for attention and refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. Melanie's situation deteriorated much further after her divorce. She lost her house and most of her belongings, and was forced to move in with my parents. I wish I could feel sorry for her, but I don't. Melanie had spent her entire life putting others down in order to boost her own status, and now she was reaping the benefits. Even yet, it was difficult not to feel some residual anger when I heard my mother discuss assisting Melanie in getting back on her feet. "She's going through a tough time," Mom said one day during one of our few phone calls. "We're just trying to be there for her." "Of course you are," I replied, unable to hide my contempt. "Hasn't she always been your priority?" "That's not fair, Lindsay," Mom exclaimed, protective as usual. "She is your sister. Don't you worry about what happens to her?" "No, Mom," I replied simply. "I care about what happens to me and Zach, and I'm not going to let her drag us down with her." It was a harsh statement, but it was true. I'd spent far too much of my life thinking about Melanie, about how to deal with her drama, and how to convince my parents of the harm she was creating. I was now focused on defending myself and the life I had created with Zach. Melanie appeared to fade away from my radar over time. The legal letter had worked. She ceased spreading lies about us, and we were finally at peace. Zach and I immersed ourselves into our profession and our relationship, creating a life founded on love and mutual respect. My relationship with my parents remained tense, but I had come to realize that certain things would never change. Every now and again, I received updates about Melanie from family members. She was still living with my parents and struggling to reconstruct her life. Part of me wondered if she'd learned anything from this, but I doubted it. Melanie is the type of person who rarely changes. Finally, I understood I didn't need her to provide me with closure. I didn't require an apology or recognition of the grief she had inflicted. What I needed to do was move forward, leave the past behind, and concentrate on the future. And this is exactly what I did. It took years, literally years, for my parents to understand what I had been attempting to tell them throughout my life. For as long as I could remember, they had overlooked, justified, and even glorified Melanie's behavior, regardless of how toxic or harmful it was. However, as the consequences of her acts became apparent, they were unable to ignore the reality any longer. I initially noticed a shift when, on the phone with my father, Melanie had returned to live with them months before, and I had kept my distance. My parents periodically tried to contact me, but our chats were difficult. This time, however, my father sounded different. Tired and worn out in a way I had never heard before. "How are you doing, Lindsay?" he inquired, his tone surprisingly mild. "I feel like we haven't really talked in a while." "I'm fine, Dad," I replied cautiously. "Busy with work, you know." There was a gap before he sighed. I wanted to say I'm sorry. The words took me off guard. "I'm sorry for what?" "For everything," he said. "For not listening to you and not noticing what Melanie was doing. Your mom and I have discussed how badly we have let you down." I wasn't sure what to say. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. My parents finally admitting the pain they had caused by continuously side with Melanie. But now that the moment had arrived, it seemed strange. "Dad," I asked softly, "what brought this on?" "Melanie," he acknowledged. "Getting her back in the house has been eye-opening, to say the least. The way she speaks to your mother, the way she blames everyone else for her problems. It is tiresome. It has made us realize that we have allowed her to get away with far too much, for far too long." Part of me wanted to be vindicated, but largely, I felt tired. "I appreciate the apology," I responded, "but it doesn't change what happened." "I know," he replied swiftly. "I do not expect it to. I just wanted you to know that we see it now, and we apologize." A few days later, my mother called. She was never as forthright as my father, but her message was consistent. "We didn't do right by you, Lindsay," she admitted, her voice thick with sorrow. "We ignored Melanie's behavior because it was simpler than confronting it, and as a result, we damaged you. I'm very sorry." Hearing their comments was a step forward, but it did not alleviate years of sorrow. I told them so. "I need time," I explained. "This isn't something I can just forgive overnight." They appeared to understand, and for the first time, they didn't try to force me to move quicker than I was willing to. Not long after, I received a letter. It came from Melanie. Seeing her handwriting on the envelope filled me with dread. I hesitated whether or not to open it, but my curiosity won out. The letter was long, many pages of carefully written text, and as I read it, I couldn't help but feel a range of emotions. Melanie apologized for everything, the lies, the manipulation, and the years spent undermining and making me feel tiny. She stated that envy drove most of her actions, but she did not go into detail about what she was envious of. She apologized for spreading stories about Zach, causing tension at family events, and capitalizing on years of favoritism. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't undo," she wrote, "but I want you to know that I sincerely apologize. I've done a lot of reflecting, and I realize how toxic I've been, not only to you, but to everyone around me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but maybe someday we can start over." Reading her remarks, I felt a glimpse of something I couldn't quite place, perhaps relief, or maybe optimism. But overall, I felt cautious. Melanie's past behavior had taught me not to take her comments at their value. A single letter, no matter how passionate, was insufficient to repair the damage she had done. I showed Zach the letter that evening, and we discussed it during supper. "Do you believe she means it?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Maybe. But even if she does, you don't have to accept her back into your life." "I know," I replied. "I just don't want to make the wrong decision. If she is serious, perhaps I should give her a chance." Giving her a chance doesn't mean jumping back into the relationship as if nothing happened. Zach told me, "You can take it slow, set boundaries, protect yourself." He was correct, of course. If I was going to look into the prospect of restoring a relationship with Melanie, it had to be on my terms. For the following 2 weeks, I tucked the letter away in a drawer, reviewing it sometimes, but without answering. I was not prepared, and I did not want to rush into anything. Meanwhile, my parents continued to work on repairing our relationship. They called on a frequent basis, not to guilt or pressure me, but to simply check in. It was a minor but significant difference, and I appreciated it more than I let on. Melanie had recently begun visiting a therapist, according to my mother. "I think she's really trying to change," she told me. "She's been talking about all the things she wants to do differently, how she wants to make amends." "That's good," I remarked warily, "but I'm still not ready." "I understand," Mom murmured, and for once, she appeared to mean it. Months passed, and I began to experience a feeling of closure. Not because I had forgiven Melanie or repaired our relationship, but because I was finally enjoying life on my own terms. I was doing well in my career. My relationship with Zach was better than ever, and I had surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me. My connection with my parents was gradually improving, and while not ideal, it was a step in the right way. I eventually decided to write Melanie back. My letter was brief and to the point. I thanked her for her apology and acknowledged her efforts, but I made it clear that I required time and distance. If we're ever going to rebuild our relationship, I declared, it has to be on new terms. Terms that respect my boundaries and my well-being. I had no idea how she would react, and honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for her approval or attempting to please her. I was living for myself, which felt liberated. In the end, I recognized that forgiveness isn't about condoning someone's behavior or pretending the damage never occurred. It's about releasing yourself from the weight of that pain and choosing to move forward in a way that preserves your serenity, which is exactly what I plan to do. Life has a tendency of shocking you when you're least expecting it. After years of struggling with my own issues, dealing with family dysfunction, and questioning my worth, I suddenly found myself in a position where everything was fitting into place. Not because life had suddenly become flawless, but because I had stopped striving to meet everyone else's expectations. Professionally, my graphic design career was flourishing. Over the years, I developed a strong portfolio and received praise for my work. The true turning point came when I entered an industry competition with a campaign I produced for a sustainable fashion firm. I had thrown my heart and energy into that project, creating a visual identity that reflected the brand's essence, while also pushing the boundaries of what was considered traditional design. When I received an email alerting me that I had won the coveted International Design Excellence Award, I couldn't believe it. At first, I assumed it was an error. I must have read the email a dozen times before it sank in. Winning that prize was more than just a recognition of my abilities. It reminded me that I could achieve greatness on my own terms. The ceremony was held in New York City, and Zach insisted on accompanying me. "This is your moment," he stated proudly. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The event was a whirlwind. I strolled into the large ballroom, feeling both nervous and delighted, surrounded by some of the most prominent personalities in the design industry. When my name was called and I walked up to the stage to receive the prize, the cheering was thunderous. I delivered a brief statement, thanking those who had helped me along the way, and dedicated the award to the mentors who had pushed me to pursue my goal. Following the ceremony, numerous industry executives approached me, including Isabel Marchand, creative director of a large advertising agency. She said my art was refreshing and bold, and she wanted to collaborate on a new project. That conversation marked the start of a professional connection that would lead to innumerable opportunities for me in the years ahead. Winning the award also spurred me to launch an initiative I had been planning for years. A mentorship program for budding designers. I termed it Creative Futures. The purpose was straightforward: to give information, guidance, and chances for budding designers who didn't have typical entry points into the business. Setting up the application was no easy task. I collaborated with local design schools and industry professionals to secure money through a variety of grants and sponsorships. Zach, my ever-supportive boyfriend, offered to help with the business side of things, connecting me with potential sponsors through his own network. By the time the program began, we had a roster of excellent mentors and a group of bright, hungry students ready to make an impact on the world. The first year of the program was a huge success. One of our mentees, a young woman named Tasha, went on to secure an internship at a renowned design firm, and several others earned scholarships to further their education. Seeing their progress and excitement reminded me why I fell in love with design in the first place. While I was busy developing Creative Futures, Zach was making waves in his own career. His technology company had developed from a modest, scrappy startup to an industry leader. After years of steady growth, Zach decided to expand internationally, establishing offices in London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Berlin. The expansion was a massive undertaking. Zach spent months traveling between locations, engaging with local teams and supervising the establishment of each new office. It was difficult work, but he relished the challenge. "I've always wanted to take this company global," he told me one night during dinner. "And now, it's actually occurring. It feels surreal." Despite his tight schedule, Zach always found time for us. Whether it was setting aside an hour for a peaceful supper at home, or surprising me with a weekend getaway, he never let work come between us. His ability to strike a balance between ambition and love was one of many reasons I respected him. As our professions progressed, we began to consider what we wanted our lives to be like in the years ahead. We both enjoyed the vitality of the city, but we also desired a retreat, somewhere we could unwind and recharge away from the hustle and bustle. That is how we ended up purchasing the Lake Cottage. Originally, Zach came up with the idea. He had been looking through real estate ads one evening when he came upon the property, a large mansion on the banks of Lake Tahoe. The house itself was spectacular, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing breathtaking views of the sea, a large terrace ideal for holding events, and a private dock for boating and kayaking. "Take a look at this," Zach replied, sliding his laptop across the table. "I think we should go see it." I scrolled through the photographs, my heart skipping a beat. "It's beautiful," I said. "Do we really need a facility like this?" "It's not about need," Zach said with a smile. "It's about creating an environment in which we can unwind and enjoy life. We've worked hard, Lindsay. I believe we deserve this." A few weeks later, we flew to Tahoe to tour the property. The instant we stepped inside, I knew it was the one. The house felt like a dream come true, luxurious but intimate, with every detail carefully planned. By the time we departed, we'd made an offer. Having the lake house felt like the pinnacle of everything we'd worked toward. We spent our weekends there, having friends for barbecues on the deck, taking long walks down the beach, and relaxing by the fire pit beneath the stars. It became our haven, a spot where we could unwind from the stresses of our hectic lives and simply enjoy each other's company. Looking back on everything we'd done, I couldn't help but be grateful, not only for our achievement, but also for the path that had led us here, the difficulties we had encountered, the lessons we had learned, and the love that sustained us through it all. I knew there were more chapters to our narrative to be written, but for now, I was pleased. Life was not ideal, but it was ours, which was more than enough. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking, real-life stories happening around you. Proposed to my girlfriend of 4 years. She said no, because it wasn't a surprise. Now, I'm wondering if we're on the same page about marriage. Original post. I'll start by saying I love my girlfriend a lot, but she is definitely high maintenance. We've been talking about getting married for a couple of years now, but I wanted to wait until I knew a wedding was something we could afford. I finally got a promotion, and she found stable employment, so I went out and bought a ring. We went on a vacation last week. The whole trip was very romantic, and I proposed to her on the beach, which I thought she would have wanted. Turns out she expected it all along because the trip was so romantic, and she said no. She wants me to try again, but wants it to be a surprise this time. She also wants a photographer to be there to capture the moment. It was pretty fucking embarrassing. Few people came up to us to congratulate us, and she was explaining why she said no. I'm not sure what to do. She wanted it to be a surprise, but also wanted me to propose as soon as I felt ready to. We also talked about her ideal engagement, and it's on a beach. Yes, seriously, in a forest or in a field. I can't imagine any possible scenario where I could surprise her at one of those locations. She is not the outdoorsy type, so it'd be unlikely she would be in any of those locations anyways. I explained my frustration to her, and she just said, well, if you want to get married, you will find a way to make it work. It seems so bratty and immature, and I'm not sure how to deal with her now. I'm still really pissed off about it. What should I do about this? Am I wrong to be pissed off? T.E. Proposed to my girlfriend, but she said no because it wasn't a surprise, and there wasn't a photographer there to capture the moment. Only wants to get engaged if the proposal fits a very specific image she has. Relevant comments. Comment 1. Your girlfriend doesn't sound nearly mature enough to get married. Take this as a sign of your life to come and get out. Whoop, I think you're right. I had been trying to justify it for her, but judging by the overwhelming response, I should probably break it off. Comment 2. Ask your good friends their truthful opinion on her, and make sure to let them know that they won't get a backlash for saying something bad. They know better than us. Oh. Mopey. My friends can't stand her. Comment 3. Take the ring back to the jeweler. Does she want an engagement or does she want a marriage? I can totally see bridezilla growing on her already. Yikes. Oop. Yeah. That's another thing. When we were talking about her dream proposal, she was showing me her Pinterest for her dream wedding, and it's full of stuff we won't ever be able to afford. I told her it's unlikely our wedding would be like that, but we could still make it nice. And she said she'd rather wait till we can afford her dream wedding. Comment 4. And by rather wait, I suspect she means nag you about either getting a better job or taking out a loan to pay for what she wants. Don't do this to yourself, man. Oop. Yeah, she told me I could start selling some of the furniture I make, which is something I do as a hobby that she wants me to turn into a second job. Update. Here's a link to my last post, but it got deleted. To summarize, I proposed to my GF on a nice vacation, and she rejected it because she knew it was coming and there wasn't a photographer. Thank you all for your comments and messages. Sorry I couldn't respond to most, but I read them all. I decided to try and talk about it with her one last time, before throwing in the towel. I wasn't really expecting much, but I just wanted to see if she'd see my side. She lives with me, so I wanted to end things on a good note. She didn't understand at all. She was still saying I needed to work for it, and she wasn't taking me seriously, so I broke up with her. Then she told me she accepts my proposal, and we're just going through a rough patch, but we will work it out. She was really trying to get me to change my mind, and was promising me she would be better to me. She completely ignored me every time I told her we were breaking up, and was always yelling over me about how we were going to work things out now that we're engaged. And eventually, I just got tired and went to sleep, thinking it was perfectly clear that it was over. I woke up Saturday to a whole bunch of messages. She found the ring and took a pic with it, announcing our engagement, and tagged me in it on Facebook. We got into another huge fight, and eventually I just called her parents and told them to come pick up all her shit, or it's going to the dump as soon as she leaves. They were surprisingly understanding. Her dad seemed really embarrassed by her, but they were a huge help. I know it's illegal to do that, and I was supposed to actually evict her, but she got seriously violent, and I didn't want her in my house anymore. She smashed my iPad and knocked my PlayStation off the TV stand, and both are completely broken. So I didn't want to wait around and see what else she would do. She wouldn't even give me the ring back. Her dad had to guilt her into it. It was pretty pathetic. So that's the end of us. Really sucks I wasted the last 4 years with her, but I guess it was better to get out now. It's nice that I can hang out with all my friends again. A girl I'm friends with asked me out on a date, so that's what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm actually pretty nervous. I know it's way too early, but even if it doesn't work out, it should be fun to start dating again. TL.E broke up with GF, and she decided that meant we were engaged. Then she threw a fit and broke my iPad and PlayStation relevant comments. Comment 1. A girl I'm friends with asked me out on a date, so that's what I'm doing tomorrow. Too soon, bro. Oop. She knows the entire situation. It's not serious. She told me years ago she had a crush on me, but we're good friends now. Who knows what will happen? Comment 2. Perhaps this is why your crazy ex did not like your girlfriends. Oop. Yeah, that's what started it. I don't blame my girlfriend for that. I shut my friend down then and told my girlfriend about it because I didn't want to keep things from her. I don't think I did anything wrong in that situation, but after that, she didn't want me talking to any women. After kicking me out from my golden child half-brother, 6 months later, Dad now wants me to lie to cover up his crime, or they'll go to jail. I, male 18, turned 18 approximately 4 months ago, and my father kicked me out 6 months ago after my jerk half-brother Derek, 24M, wanted to go back home. He didn't want to rent a place like a normal person, so he chose to live with my father. Derek is my father's kid from his first relationship, but Derek's mother and father split up soon after he was born, so they didn't have much of a relationship after that. Derek is much closer to my father than he is to his mother, so we spent a lot of time together growing up since he came over more frequently than was legally required under his custody agreement. I believe he was meant to spend half of the month with my father, but he was always present. Or maybe that's just my brain exaggerating things because I despise spending time with him. But my father compelled us to. I also know that he disliked me and considered me a threat. My mother died a few years ago following a lengthy fight with lung cancer, and that's when things started to go wrong between me and my father. Don't get me wrong, things had been awful between us since I was a child. I suppose my father didn't really want a child like me, or perhaps he didn't want a child in general. Whatever it was, he treated me strangely when I was younger, and it nearly always seemed like he didn't want me around. Most of the time, he was angry with me and yelled at me for little matters. He never showed me affection, and when I tried to win him over, he responded with indifference. However, Derek was a very different guy. When Derek was around the house, my father transformed into the best father in the world, doing everything I asked of him. He compelled Derek and me to spend time together, despite the fact that we both expressed a strong dislike for each other. Derek did not like me because he regarded me as a threat, and I did not like him since he used to bully me as a child. He was always trying to fight with me and push me around just because he could. He felt he could get away with it since my father would never speak against him. When I complained to my father about Derek being harsh with me, he told me to toughen up and deal with it because, allegedly, that's how boys should play. And he didn't want me to grow up to be a pansy. I assumed it was what my father expected of me, so I gradually learned to swallow my pride and accept it. I would never fight back because I didn't want to upset my father, and I knew fighting with Derek was a definite way to get shouted at. It didn't matter whether Derek was screwing things up for me. Whenever I battled with him, I was always in the wrong. My father didn't care about the story. Whatever happened, I was always the bad person. It was clear that my father had a favorite, and it wasn't me, not even for a second. He didn't think it was weird that Derek was picking on me, even though I was 6 years younger than him. Derek gradually modified his techniques of bullying me. When he began high school, he shifted to tormenting me with his pals, because physically striking me was no longer effective as we grew older. Before that, school had been my safe haven, because I was still in elementary school while he was in middle school. And we were in different buildings, so he couldn't reach me there. But after I started middle school, we were in the same building, and he and his cronies ganged up on me, constantly making fun of me. They even propagated malicious falsehoods about me, such as suggesting I was mentally handicapped. All the seniors recognized me as Derek's dumb younger brother. I'm not even kidding. That's what they used to call me. They would even call me slurs, which made things very tough for me. When kids approach middle school, they become more concerned with their reputation. So even my elementary school pals would no longer speak to me, since I wasn't cool enough to hang out with them. It wasn't until Derek graduated that I got the school all to myself and could exist peacefully. I had a couple of friends, but most people just believed them, and I let them get away with it because I was so tired of fighting all the time that I couldn't bear to dispute. Things at home were exactly as horrible as they had always been since Derek and my father would never miss a chance to throw me down and make me feel like an idiot. The funniest thing was that I wasn't even an idiot. I received decent marks and excelled in science and other topics. But my father and Derek didn't care. Derek was a football player, but he was also a good student. You can imagine how difficult things must have been for me at home. Derek was everything I was not. Athletic, academically gifted, and exactly the kind of kid my father had always desired. On the other hand, there was me, who was completely average. They never failed to remind me of how insignificant and mediocre I was. My mother attempted to protect me most of the time, but my father was a real sweet talker, and he would convince her that what they said was just for fun and didn't mean anything. My mother, who was normally nice and sweet, was deeply in love with my father and never saw him for who he truly was. She did her best to protect me, and I admired her efforts, but it wasn't enough. My father and Derek continued to bully me as long as they could. Finally, Derek left for college, and I felt relieved. My father was still present, but he was a lot less irritating to deal with without Derek continually picking on me. But before I could experience what it was like to live with my parents without Derek, my mother was stricken with lung cancer. It was extremely tough for us to accept, since it felt like our entire world had been broken. My father and I only had one thing in common. We both adored my mother. Thus, her illness devastated us both. Instead of bringing our family closer, my father chose to make the worst of it. My mother was already hurting, but instead of my father and I putting up a brave front for her, he began to distance himself from her even more. Previously, he would at least speak to me, even if only to mock me. But following my mother's illness, he stopped doing that and began pretending I didn't exist at all. I can forgive him for it because we were both in pain, and he simply chose a different approach. I would have preferred that my mother's dilemma brought us closer together, but that was plainly not to be. Even if it was meant to be, my father was the type of person who would make it impossible because, for some reason, he despised me and couldn't tolerate the thought of me being happy. My mother's illness worsened over time, and my father's temper began to affect me. He would either not speak to me at all and utterly ignore me, or he would be really hostile to me. He almost made me weep several times because he was so disrespectful. I attempted to keep the peace in the family by not responding to my father, since I knew it would only give him more reasons to berate and pick on me. When my mother was unwell, Derek would take it easy on me when he returned home from college, which I enjoyed. He wasn't polite to me, but at least he was human, which was all I could ask for. Things were horrible when my mother was still alive, but once she died, I went from frying pan to fire. Things were very quiet around the house for the first few months after my mother passed away. That meant I'd do all of the labor while my father stayed unresponsive. He was functional. He went to work, came home and ate dinner, but nothing else. I was concerned for him and phoned my grandparents several times, telling them that I suspected my father was depressed, but they did not take me seriously. They either didn't care enough about their son to check on him after the funeral, or they detested me as much as my father and refused to do what I asked. After a few months, my father began to return to his old self. Unfortunately, it also included excessive drinking, which made me feel bad about myself again. He would continuously force me to do chores around the house, which was quite exhausting because I was not only going to school but also doing all of the housework that my mother used to do, even when she was sick. My father and I were able to complete everything, but after her death, all of the duty fell to me. I couldn't even complain, because if I did, my father would tell me that I wasn't bringing in any money. So this was the least I could do to stay there. It was extremely offensive, but I had nowhere else to go, so I just had to put up with it. For a long time, the only thing I looked forward to was going to college, since it meant I could finally be free of my father and not have to return home. I no longer considered that place to be my home, because it had stopped feeling like home to me when my mother died. I could have moved out and started living with my mother's parents when she died, but they lived a long distance away, and I still had a year of school remaining, so that was not an option. Then a few months ago, when my father learned that his golden kid, Derek, would be returning home, he kicked me out. I ended up moving in with my grandparents. Derek had moved out for college a few years ago and has not returned to live with us since. After graduation, he found work and opted to stay where he was because his partner wanted to start a life away from home. Derek only came back for the holidays on occasion. He married his fiancée around 2 years ago since she was pregnant. They had just graduated, and it felt like the perfect time to get married. Surprisingly, I got invited to the wedding. Derek didn't torture me for one day. My mother was also present, despite her health, and while Derek wasn't close to her, he couldn't deny that everyone liked her. Derek wasn't very close to his own mother because she was a lousy parent. Derek's mother was already in her fourth marriage at the time of his wedding, and it appeared that her major purpose in life was to be wealthy. She worked and made her own money, but it came at the expense of her connection with her kid. I suppose that explains why Derek was so attached to our father. He only had one parent who actually cared about him, and he didn't want to share that parent with me. Anyway, Derek married and had a child shortly afterwards. They had been living peacefully for the previous 2 years, but 6 months ago, for some reason, they decided to return. My father notified me about it 2 weeks before Derek was meant to arrive home. He was arrogant about it and sat me down one day to tell me I needed to find a place to live since Derek was returning. I had to give up my room. We had 3 bedrooms, so I questioned why they couldn't take the guest room. My father informed me that Derek and his wife would be living in the guest room and using my room as a nursery. It was allegedly important that I leave the house because I was about to turn 18 and become an adult. My father's insistence that I leave simply because Derek was relocating back with his family seemed unnecessary and selfish to me. I tried to argue with him, but there was no point. He had already made his decision. He gave me 2 weeks to leave, and if I didn't, he said he'd contact the cops. I'm sure there was a legal way to challenge this, but I hadn't considered it at the time. I was terrified since I didn't trust my father and knew he was perfectly capable of kicking me out without warning. I scrambled to find a place and eventually decided to move in with my grandparents. I had resisted doing so because they lived so far away, and I still needed to finish school, but I had no other choice. There were only a few weeks left in high school, so I was willing to take the chance. I moved out after a few days because I did not want to be present when Derek returned home with his wife and child. My father didn't seem to care when I moved out, and he didn't even say goodbye to me on the day I packed and left with the movers. My grandparents had come all the way to pick me up in their vehicle, and they were about to get into my father. But I told them it wasn't worth the hassle. It has been 6 months since that day, and I'm still living with my grandparents. I haven't spoken to my father since he kicked me out, and I had no intention of doing so again. I was meant to start college in a few weeks, and everything was already set up. I had absolutely no reason to speak with my father or Derek again. Unfortunately, they were the ones who had to contact me since something had happened, and they needed me to help them out. They paid me a visit a few days ago, which astonished me because I didn't expect them to contact me at all. Still, my grandparents let them in, and I decided to talk to them because they sounded desperate. I discovered that Derek had returned with his family because he had lost his job and was struggling to pay his rent. So he took the difficult decision to return. His wife was fine with it because she preferred to be a stay-at-home mother and did not want to work till their child was older. So this was their best option. When they returned, they anticipated to find work quickly. But that was not the case because none of the nearby businesses were hiring, and persons with Derek's skill set were extremely prevalent. He wasn't a spectacular candidate either. My father somehow managed to secure him a position at the company where he worked. Neither of them were happy about it because it paid less than Derek's previous salary, but it was all they had, so they had to make the best of it. Derek had been stealing from the company for several months until it was discovered a few weeks ago. My father and Derek were both in trouble because their bosses suspected they were working together and threatened to sue them if they did not return the money immediately. The only reason they hadn't been sued yet was because it was a family business, and the CEO was a close friend of my mother's. He hadn't filed a case against them for embezzlement yet because he respected her, but he wasn't going to wait long. My father and Derek asked me to help them. They asked me to say that they required the money for my college fund and had been stealing for the purpose rather than personal gain. My father hoped that this would persuade the CEO to be patient with them and give them more time to return the money. They knew they'd still be fired, but at least they wouldn't go to prison. They were counting on me to assist them and build the ideal picture of the poor, innocent victim. I could not believe they had the arrogance to ask for this. After how they had treated me my entire life, I answered no almost instantly, without even thinking about it, because their plan was stupid, and I didn't want to be a part of that. When I informed them I wasn't interested in assisting them, they became irritated and told me I had to, since there was a very real possibility they would wind up in jail. They stated I couldn't allow an old grudge to spoil their lives. I told them it wasn't a little grudge, and it surely wasn't from years ago. My father had only recently kicked me out, and it hadn't even been a year, so I'd consider it rather recent. But that wasn't the only reason I didn't want to aid them. I thought their scheme was dishonest, and I knew the guy my father worked for. As I already stated, my mother and he were very close friends, and he really liked me. He and my mother had grown up together, and I used to address him as uncle whenever he was over. Even at my mother's funeral, we had a pleasant chat and liked one another. I moved out after a few days because I did not want to be present when Derek returned home with his wife and child. My father didn't seem to care when I moved out, and he didn't even say goodbye to me on the day I packed and left with the movers. My grandparents had come all the way to pick me up in their vehicle, and they were about to get into my father. But I told them it wasn't worth the hassle. It has been 6 months since that day, and I am still living with my grandparents. I haven't spoken to my father since he kicked me out, and I had no intention of doing so again. I was meant to start college in a few weeks, and everything was already set up. I had absolutely no reason to speak with my father or Derek again. Unfortunately, they were the ones who had to contact me since something had happened, and they needed me to help them out. They paid me a visit a few days ago, which astonished me because I didn't expect them to contact me at all. Still, my grandparents let them in, and I decided to talk to them because they sounded desperate. I discovered that Derek had returned with his family because he had lost his job and was struggling to pay his rent, so he made the difficult decision to return. His wife was fine with it because she preferred to be a stay-at-home mother and did not want to work till their child was older, so this was their best option. When they returned, they anticipated finding work quickly, but that was not the case because none of the nearby businesses were hiring. And persons with Derek's skill set were extremely prevalent. He wasn't a spectacular candidate either. My father somehow managed to secure him a position at the company where he worked. Neither of them were happy about it because it paid less than Derek's previous salary, but it was all they had, so they had to make the best of it. Derek had been stealing from the company for several months until it was discovered a few weeks ago. My father and Derek were both in trouble because their bosses suspected they were working together and threatened to sue them if they did not return the money immediately. The only reason they hadn't been sued yet was because it was a family business, and the CEO was a close friend of my mother's. He hadn't filed a case against them for embezzlement yet because he respected her, but he wasn't going to wait long. My father and Derek asked me to help them. They asked me to say that they required the money for my college fund and had been stealing for that purpose rather than personal gain. My father hoped that this would persuade the CEO to be patient with them and give them more time to return the money. They knew they'd still be fired, but at least they wouldn't go to prison. They were counting on me to assist them and build the ideal picture of the poor, innocent victim. I could not believe they had the arrogance to ask for this, after how they had treated me my entire life. I answered no almost instantly, without even thinking about it, because their plan was stupid, and I didn't want to be a part of that. When I informed them I wasn't interested in assisting them, they became irritated and told me I had to, since there was a very real possibility they would wind up in jail. They stated I couldn't allow an old grudge spoil their lives. I told them it wasn't a little grudge, and it surely wasn't from years ago. My father had only recently kicked me out. It hadn't even been a year, so I'd consider it rather recent. But that wasn't the only reason I didn't want to aid them. I thought their scheme was dishonest, and I knew the guy my father worked for. As I already stated, my mother and he were very close friends, and he really liked me. He and my mother had grown up together, and I used to address him as uncle whenever he was over. Even at my mother's funeral, we had a pleasant chat and liked one another. My mother had actually told him to give my father a job at his company when he was struggling, but instead of being grateful, Derek had tried to make a joke of these people. And now my father was attempting to cover it all up by using me as a shield. I thought that was quite low, and I couldn't in good conscience be a part of it. So I informed them that it would be in their best interest to simply pay off whatever amount they had stolen, rather than try to cover it up with more lies, since I was not going to side with them. They might land up in jail if they tried to deceive him again, which they would almost certainly lose. That would jeopardize their future, since they would undoubtedly go to jail. They had no idea how simple things were for them right now, or how complicated things would become if they carried out their mad plan. I tried to explain it to them, but my father became enraged and refused to listen to my speech. If I wanted to help them, I would support their strategy rather than give them useless advice. So I informed him I was not going to be a part of this, and to my astonishment, my father began crying. I'd never seen anything like this before, and it made me very uneasy. He informed me that he had been banking on me because, at the end of the day, I was his son, and that no matter what had happened in the past, he would have supported me if I had been in a similar situation. He stated he expected the same from me, because this was such a big matter, and he didn't want to go to prison. Derek felt the same way and urged me to help them since he knew I was popular among my mother's friends and was the only one who could help them. My mother would have made things much easier, but now that she was gone, I was the next best person to deal with it, and they relied on me. It was difficult, but I still had to decline them. I pushed them to come clean and pay back the money they owed. They were enraged and claimed that the only reason I was screwing them over was because they used to tease me when I was younger, and they were dissatisfied with how I handled things today. They departed after that, but I'm still thinking about it, and the guilt is eating at me. I keep picturing them in jail, and it just doesn't seem right. At the same time, I do not want to be a part of something unlawful or immoral. It would be an insult to my mother, since I would be using her friendship to manipulate a very close friend of hers. I'm terribly torn about what I should do, and time is of the key, because my dad and Derek don't have forever to pay off their debt. So am I a jerk for refusing to lie and cover up for my father and half-brother who have bullied me my whole life? Update 1. I've made a decision, and I believe I'll keep not assisting them out. Not only is it immoral and unethical, but it is also unlawful, and I refuse to be a part of it. If my father and Derek want to stay out of jail, they will have to handle this themselves. It's not like they're in mortal peril. They've been offered the opportunity to make things right, repay the money Derek stole, and get out of this without jeopardizing their image. They can choose to return all of the money and handle this themselves, so I have no cause to feel guilty. The majority of the comments here urged that I keep out of this, not just because my father and Derek were terrible people, but also because what they were doing was horrific, and I wouldn't be able to carry it on my conscience and move on as they would. We're clearly not made of the same stuff, and I wouldn't want to do something like this, which is why I've decided to keep out of it. If they contact me after this, I will block them. For the record, they are already blocked everywhere, but I'm sure they'll try alternative numbers or social media accounts to reach me. My grandparents also believe I'm doing the right thing by remaining out of this, because they are responsible for cleaning up the mess they made. It makes no sense to expect anything from me after how they've treated me for so long. Update 2. Hi. So as expected, my father texted me today. He last visited me 8 days ago, and we haven't spoken since. As I already stated, he called me from a different number that I was unfamiliar with, and I answered the phone unintentionally. I hung up as soon as I heard my father's voice on the other end, but I was a little slow to block him, so he was able to text me. In the message, he claimed he understood I didn't want to talk about it any further, but he and Derek were in serious difficulty and needed my help. He claimed that their employer was constantly breathing down their necks, threatening to sue if they did not refund the money. It made me feel guilty, but I texted him back and told him that I would not be assisting them and that he should start searching for alternative ways to refund the money rather than avoiding the matter. I then blocked him, hoping he understood where I was coming from. Even if he doesn't, I hope he does the right thing. I don't want to have a father in prison. Update 3. Hey, I haven't heard back from my father yet, but my grandparents contacted my mother's friend, the CEO, to inquire about his plans. We hadn't contacted him previously because he's a busy man, and we didn't want to press him too hard. But we wanted to know what was going on, because communicating with my father or Derek was no longer an option. So my grandfather spoke with him, and he informed us that he intended to file a lawsuit if he did not receive the money back within a few months. He claimed he was willing to let everything go due to his friendship with my mother, but he couldn't forgive the debt. Honestly, I respected that. He was much more tolerant than most people would have been in this position. He even apologized to me, saying he was sorry for what was occurring. But I told him it was no big deal, because I no longer live with my father. And honestly, my father deserves it. We don't know what will happen, but I believe my father is wise enough to realize that he needs to repay the money in some way to avoid going to jail. It will take some time, but I'm confident they will work it out, and I won't have to worry. I also had a long conversation with my mother's buddy, who informed me that before she died, my mother had spoken with him and stated that if I ever wanted to intern anywhere for some fast cash or simply get a job in general, his door was always open. That's good to know. And I'll keep it in mind for the future. Even after she's gone, my mother still looks out for me, which makes me very happy. Crazy mother-in-law and father-in-law arrested after attempting to trespass on our land and being attacked by bees on the neighbor's property. I reside in a very rural place, on a tiny ranch that has been in my family since my grandfather's day. We are around 15 minutes from the nearest little town. When I say small, I actually mean small. My wife and I met by happenstance around 6 years ago when I stopped in town to pick up some groceries. She gave off a tomboy feeling and had recently arrived in the region. She had recently finished school and discovered that she despised city life and wished to return to something more familiar. I will get to that later. I believe she noticed me come in with my pickup and some big equipment and came over to ask what kind of animals I had. She soon came to the point. She was looking for work. She had previous experience with cattle and was new to the region. It's unusual in our area to see single women looking for ranch hand employment, but she claimed she could prove herself. And if I wasn't impressed, I could drive her back to town and drop her off at the bus stop. I was seeking an extra hand for the next few months and had considered asking my neighbor's lads. But I decided to give her a chance. I'm pleased I did since she had a strong work ethic and was proactive about everything on the ranch. I let her remain in a guest room in the main home for the first week until she saved enough money for an apartment. Within 6 months, she moved back in and we began dating. 8 months later, we married in a quiet ceremony attended by approximately 20 friends and family members. Her uncle was the only family member that turned up. Her uncle was a tank of a man, even in his old age, and he had a sheep farm in Northern California. During the ceremony, we talked a little about business, and he was pleased to give my wife away. I could tell how the father influenced her work ethic and livestock knowledge. However, there was one topic that my wife disliked discussing: her biological parents. At first, she only mentioned there was bad blood between them, which was great because we didn't know each other well yet. However, once we were engaged, I wanted to learn more about her family and what I was getting into. Her mother, the professor, worked at a college, teaching a subject I would most likely never study. My wife portrayed her father, Phil, as a weak man who would do whatever the professor desired. Some of the details she told me about her mother's actions seemed ludicrous and borderline psychotic. For example, in middle school, the professor tried to obtain my wife a girlfriend by claiming she was a lesbian. Now, while my wife is a tomboy, she is not a lesbian. There was also a time when the professor desired to live a natural lifestyle and begged Phil's brother to allow them to reside on his property. Within a week, the professor despised it and summoned them both back to the city. My wife, on the other hand, adored the farm and felt a connection to both it and her uncle. She left home at 16 and stayed with her uncle until she was 18. The professor repeatedly threatened to drag her back home, but never followed through. After turning 18, my wife went to school, received a 4-year degree, and tried an office job but found it unsatisfactory. She began traveling the bus to rural locations in search of suitable work. And this is how we met. Last year, around March, we began receiving mail addressed to the professor and Phil, including bills, bank statements, and the like. I thought this was unusual, but my wife wanted to throw it all away. I began labeling the letters returned to sender and no such occupant, and returned them to the mailbox. This situation worsened in October. I was tidying up the yard when a brilliant white SUV arrived with a U-Haul trailer attached. My wife looked up and turned pale. "Oh God, it's them," she exclaimed. A plump woman and a slender man, who only distantly resembled her uncle, emerged. The professor instantly approached my wife. "Professor, well, let me take a look at you." "It has been years." The wife. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Your instructor. The university is doing virtual classes, and with COVID, we figured we could self-isolate at our ranch." She placed an unusual emphasis on the word our. "You. Excuse me, but this isn't your ranch." "Professor, I'm confident we can resolve the ownership issue." "Aren't you going to invite us in?" "Me? Ma'am, you might be my wife's mother, but you're a stranger to me." "I would rather not." The professor turned to Phil. "Professor, make the call." Phil immediately called the cops and began constructing a story about us refusing to let them into the house that they co-owned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was insanely twisted. Fortunately, as I indicated earlier, it is a small town. The sheriff approached, and it was someone I had known for most of my life. The sheriff exemplifies the ethos of a small town constable. He strives to be a peacemaker and peacekeeper first and foremost. He was also aware that the land had been in my family for 3 generations. "Sheriff, please explain." What's this I hear about you selling half your ranch, Duke? Me, I did not. These are my wife's parents, and they believe they have a legal claim to my land. Professor. Not think. We have lived here since February. With tenant laws, that means sheriff, you know. Funny. I don't remember you in town. That quieted the professor for a moment. But then she delved into her purse and drew out a stack of mail. Mostly bills and bank statements with our ranch's address on them. Professor, then how do you explain these? The sheriff took the letters and examined them. Sheriff, you're welcome. Ma'am, these are all marked return to sender. The professor became desperate. Professor, please. I have not seen my daughter in years. I just want to make sure she's okay. Surely you can see that she pointed at me, controls her every move. The sheriff rolled his eyes and approached to speak with my wife and me again. He enjoys resolving interpersonal conflicts, but he had never experienced such craziness. Sheriff, you might want to invite them in for coffee and chat for a few minutes. They're your parents. My spouse? If you leave them here, you'll just have to come back in 5 minutes to handle an assault. Sheriff, you can't mean that. They are your family. Look, I'm just heading up the road. Invite them in and talk to them. Wife's eyes flashed with rage. Your wife asked, does this mean you're going to invite your cousin Aaron to Thanksgiving? Aaron, the sheriff's cousin, was now serving an 8-year sentence for a variety of felonies. The sheriff's entire family regarded him a source of disgrace. The sheriff's expression changed after he made that statement. He gave my wife a look like, that bad? And she simply nodded. The sheriff turned back to face the professor and Phil. Sheriff, okay, they don't want you here. It's best if you don't come back. The two protested briefly before piling back into the SUV and driving away, with the sheriff following behind to verify they were completely off the property. This was my first meeting with the professor and Phil, and it left a lasting impression. Previously, I described how my wife's mother, the professor, made an unusual attempt to grab control of our property back in October. Things became crazier in December. Keep in mind that we reside in a little village approximately an hour from a major city, so we're not completely isolated. Our ranch is approximately 15 minutes from town via Farm Road. To give you the lay of the land, I stopped in town to grab some supplies, and by the time I finished packing up the truck, the professor tapped me on the shoulder. This time, she truly acted friendly. I decided to be curt. She literally begged me to listen to her for 5 minutes at the neighborhood cafe. I didn't want to set up a scene on Main Street, so I agreed. We sat down, and the lecturer began speaking. She claimed that my wife was always unsure of who she was, and that the professor and Phil only had her best interests in mind. I didn't want to rant or make charges. I was just waiting for the talk to end. Then she explained, your wife saw you coming and wedged herself into my life. I pushed back. I stated that I felt blessed to have her in my life. Professor, what do you mean blessed? Me, pardon? Professor, you just said blessed. I put my head in my hands and wished it was over. Everyone in the cafe stared at the two of us. With her final sentence, the lecturer projected her voice. My response was, ma'am, if you're trying to win me over, I suggest you stop using vinegar. She huffed at the phrase, but then became friendly again. She reached into her purse and took out a flash drive, laying it on the table between us. Professor, okay. That's all the proof you need. Take a peek, and I guarantee you'll discover the truth. I was dying within, not just from shame, but also from the manner my mother-in-law behaved in front of individuals with whom I do business on a regular basis. They would certainly want to know what had transpired. Like I stated, it's a little town. I took the flash drive and fled. I returned to the property where my wife was waiting. She could tell something had happened in town by the pissed-off expression on my face. I recounted what had happened while holding up the flash drive. My wife was baffled by it. I wasn't about to plug it into a computer we use on a regular basis, so I hunted through a closet for an old Dell laptop that hadn't been turned on in ages. We charged it, turned it on, and blocked the Wi-Fi. My wife's suggestion. We plugged the flash drive in and discovered heaps of PDFs. I'm still not sure how to convey what was within. It looked like a journal, a college article, or a thesis research with my wife as the topic. I'm not sure what the aim was, or what the professor was testing on her own flesh and blood. It described her first experiences with toy dump trucks as a child, as well as dressed in overalls during their brief stay with her uncle, all of which were chilly, disconnected, and, as my wife described it, clinical. My wife was referred to as the subject throughout. It was odd, and I'm still unsure what the point was. My wife was outraged by the PDFs and urged us to burn the drive, which we did in the fire pit. That was the last time we heard from the professor. But my wife believes more will come. First and foremost, I want to mention that my wife is doing well. She's amused rather than terrified or furious. Yet I can tell when she feels the need to be protected. We placed a new camera directed straight at the gate, which I'm keeping locked. I noted in the comments that we had a FaceTime contact with my wife's uncle last night to see if we could gain any additional information. Her uncle initially provided brief responses, such as, "Yeah, sounds like her," and "sounds about right." He is a don't speak ill of others type of chapter. When I told him about the strange play for the ranch, he eventually revealed additional facts. Whoever predicted she'd do this before with his sheep farm gets a gold star. He stated that the professor was a major reason why he and Phil no longer speak. My wife's uncle's sheep farm was part of a much larger property owned by her grandfather. The grandfather had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter relocated to the East Coast and worked in a high-paying executive position. She is nearing retirement and was the oldest of the siblings. When the grandfather passed away, he divided his property into 3 portions. His daughter gave her half to the uncle for nearly nothing because she did not desire rural property and understood her uncle wanted to keep the farm running. The other son, Phil, retained ownership but granted uncle permission to use it. That was until Phil decided to attend an expensive university and sold his portion of the land to uncle for a good price. Uncle was able to maintain all of grandfather's land intact. Phil dated the professor during his undergraduate years and eventually married her. Uncle only heard bits and pieces because Phil only called around Thanksgiving and birthdays. That was it for many years. A few years later, the professor was in what Uncle described as a hipster phase when he learned about the farm. She didn't just show up, Phil asked first. Phil understood rural life, but the professor did not. Uncle portrayed the professor's ideal farm life as waking up to a kale smoothie, digging beets for lunch, and spending the rest of the day in the sun. If you live on a farm or ranch, you know there are plenty of everyday duties. Uncle's farm was largely a sheep farm, but they also had a vegetable garden and a small orchard, which provided enough of work. Uncle went easy on the professor, assigning her only a few tasks, such as pruning dead vines in the garden and airing the compost. She took it as an agony. She nearly devastated Uncle's tomato crop that year, forcing him to redo the compost every evening. But the way she grumbled, you'd think she was looking after the entire orchard and all the sheep. She disliked manual labor, but was strangely drawn to the concept of a farm. In my experience, joy cannot exist without pain. My wife, on the other hand, took to it right away. She enjoyed checking fences, maintaining the flock, distributing feed, and working in the vegetable garden. Uncle mentioned that they had a local butcher who came by on occasion to take a couple lambs, depending on price and demand. The butcher paid the professor a visit once when he was on the farm. The butcher was a black man, which Uncle didn't bother or care about, but the professor made a big deal of welcoming him by shaking his hand and spoke in a sing-song, high-pitched tone. Uncle thought this was weird, so he mentioned it to us. The professor desired the farm but did not want to work it. She wanted to own it on paper and have Uncle and her husband manage it. She even persuaded her husband to fight the sale he had made with Uncle a few years before in order to gain partial ownership. Of course, this went nowhere. Uncle had to pay a lawyer, but the case never reached court. After that, Uncle and the rest of the family refused to speak with Phil. I was curious, so I asked Uncle why the professor yelled at me when I stated I was blessed to have my wife. He chuckled and added, "Really, kick that hornet's nest." Then he mentioned that the first night the professor stayed with Uncle, he and his wife cooked dinner. When they sat at the table, Uncle was about to say grace. My wife flushed when he mentioned this. Apparently, this is a humiliating memory for her. The lecturer exclaimed, "This family doesn't say grace." Uncle shrugged. He wanted to be flexible and told her she didn't have to participate if she didn't want to. She tried to push things even farther, demanding that as long as she was in that house, no one would say grace. Uncle stated that this was the first time he had been disrespectful to the professor, and that no guest would tell him what he could and could not do in his own home. I'm not sure why the lecturer believed that individuals in rural areas did not attend church. After hearing about the sheep farm, I will contact a lawyer. We'll see how it goes. I believe I mentioned it in a previous piece, but we live in a tiny town. And my wacky mother-in-law, the professor, has already caused a stir in only 2 appearances. One at our house and another in town. What I appreciate about small communities is that everyone feels like family and looks out for one another. What I detest about small communities is how quickly gossip spread. The sheriff from my initial post is completely on our side. Dan has done his best to explain to everybody who asks that it is not their business. The difficulty is between my wife and me. We attempted to be social in town before COVID. We attended church regularly and took part in potlucks. I hired my neighbor's boys to help out on the ranch numerous times over the summer. We enjoy being social. When the professor created a disturbance at the cafe in December, I could feel the town's attention on me. Nobody knows what happened, but they want to. I can feel it. They are too polite to ask, yet not enough to avoid whispering. It's getting to us. The sheriff informed me that last week, the local pastor directly asked him what was going on with my wife and her mother. The sheriff stated that the pastor believed there should be an easy answer. Sheriff caught it in the bud. My wife's statements had a greater impact than we anticipated. The sheriff stated that unless we requested assistance, it was neither his nor the pastor's responsibility. He did remark to the pastor, and I recall how the sheriff put it to me, "They're part of your flock. She," referring to the professor, "is the wolf. Become an excellent shepherd." Despite this, I continue to receive strange looks whenever I am in town. Scenes like the one in December are unusual around here. Any advice? So it eventually occurred. The professor and Phil are in jail. The circumstances are also unusual, but we are relieved that a resolution has been reached. 2 nights ago, the sheriff called us in the middle of the day. My wife picked up, and after a few minutes of conversation, she began chuckling. She told me what the sheriff said. It appears the professor and Phil decided to try to sneak onto our property. Why? I can't predict this woman. The professor decided that instead of attempting to enter the ranch via the farm road, which we can see from our house, she and Phil would park a bit further away and enter our land via a neighbor's property. My neighbor to the east owns a small orchard and is a hobby beekeeper. He doesn't receive much honey each year, but what he does get, he shares or sells at the farmer's market. The bees had just begun to pollinate the field chickweed here. The professor evidently stumbled upon his bee boxes, actually bumping into one. The bees start swarming her, and either she or Phil become enraged and kick one of the boxes over. My neighbor has a sensor perimeter around his bee boxes in case of bears, and it went off. He dashed to his bee boxes and saw 2 middle-aged people batting at bees and yelling. My neighbor phoned the authorities, and after about 20 minutes of attempting to burn and hose the bees down, he swiftly filed charges for the destruction of his bee box and trespassing. Apparently, there are additional charges for interrupting and ruining a farm's agricultural capabilities since his bees pollinate his orchard. They left. Both were apparently coated in stings and are currently in county jail. The sheriff stated that the professor is attempting to argue that the area where the bee boxes are located is a public easement and that she has legal access to it. For the time being, however, it is over. Everyone here breathes a great sigh of relief. Forgotten and excluded from my parents' wedding. After 25 years together, I exposed their neglect on social media and revealed the truth. I, 17, was just forgotten on my parents' wedding day. My parents have been together for approximately 25 years, but never married. That's why when my father, 50, proposed to my mother, 49, on their anniversary, which they had always celebrated on the day my mother discovered she was pregnant with my eldest sister. Despite the fact that they had previously been together, everyone, including me, was overjoyed and celebrated the occasion. This happened way back in February. They moved right into wedding preparations, deciding early on that they would hold a modest affair in Hawaii with only their closest family and friends for an intimate ceremony. Almost immediately, my mother asked my sister, 25, to be her maid of honor, and my father asked my brother, 22M, to be his groomsman. I was not surprised nor angered by this. My sister had always been a mommy's girl, and they both enjoyed spending time together, shopping and socializing. So they had a strong bond. The same goes for my father and brother. They were often playing football together and messing about with cars. My father even coached my brother's team in middle school. That usually left me as the odd one out. I attempted to participate in my family's interests and groups, but was consistently turned down. Maybe they sensed that my interest in their activities wasn't genuine, or maybe they just didn't mind. Regardless, I was used to being the last and least important member of my family. Mom had a sister, and Dad had a brother. My parents had each other, and my two siblings were closer than they had ever been to me, leaving me feeling lonely and alienated in my own house. During the wedding preparations, it was suggested that I'd be the flower girl, but my sister thought that role would be more suited to her daughter. 3F, so that proposal was swiftly dropped. Later, my maternal grandmother offered that I read a poem or give a little statement during the ceremony, but both of my parents declined because they wanted the wedding to be low-key and didn't believe a cheesy and sappy speech would match their vision. Those were their exact words. I was still fine with it all, even though it hurt to know that I would be the only family member not in the wedding party or given any role at all on the big day. As the wedding date approached, my parents and siblings were increasingly involved in the arrangements. I observed my mother did not invite me to dress shopping, and whenever they discussed the site or the occasion, I was excluded. So I decided to keep quiet and see if they would understand I wasn't involved in any way, waiting for them to ask me something about the wedding. But that never occurred. The wedding was scheduled 3 weeks ago, toward the August. My mother casually asked me the day before their departure whether I had my luggage ready because we couldn't be late at the airport. I honestly informed her that I had not prepared anything. She looked perplexed for a second before snapping at me for not being prepared. I immediately asked her if I had a ticket, and her face turned pale. Yes, they hadn't even purchased my ticket, and I'm not sure if I had a room or any other amenities once there. Even though I was the only member in my family without a steady income, I work as a part-time babysitter. My parents had purchased first-class tickets for my siblings and a couple of other friends who were attending the wedding, but they had overlooked me. My mother urged me not to make a big deal about it, and that they could simply find me a low-cost, last-minute ticket from a budget airline. I just said, then what do I even have to wear to the ceremony? She went shopping with Sis months ago for her and all of the other female guests' outfits, but I was not included. That's when my father walked in and ordered me to suck it up, claiming I'd never been a girly girl, so I could wear whatever. I was upset because, even though I'm not the most feminine girl on the earth, I would have liked to be a part of my parents' wedding. It wasn't just the outfit. It was the fact that I had been excluded from almost everything for months. We all got into a fight, with them calling me entitled and accusing me of making myself little on purpose so they would forget about me, as if that was a sufficient reason to ignore their child. They ended up warning me that if I kept this attitude, I might as well skip the entire event. I replied with a defiant fine and went into my room. The next morning, they all departed for Hawaii without me. The ceremony was tiny, but they all shared numerous photos on Instagram and Facebook about how amazing and magical the entire week was. People noticed that I wasn't in any of the images and began asking my parents why. They responded that, unfortunately, I got COVID before the trip and had to stay home. I made a throwaway because I didn't want to give out my personal information, which is freely accessible on my real account. Unfortunately, this is not a fake. You are the first to bring up the affair theory in my mind, and I'm not sure what to make of it. I hope this is not true. Commenter: the wedding party and other guests received first-class tickets, but their youngest child did not. How is this possible? Then they don't rectify it by buying you a first-class ticket, but rather an economy ticket, because it's cheaper. Did you even have accommodations? No dress either. Just wear whatever? Now it is your fault that they are careless. Hell no, these parents stink. I believe when she started a cheaper airline, she meant it was more likely that I would arrive on time, as their aircraft was allegedly fully booked. Again, I'm not sure about the accommodations. They made no mention of them. I just know that they all stayed at the same hotel where the ceremony took place. Commenter: instead of fighting for minimum attention from her parents and siblings, she should focus her energies on seeking other sources of fulfillment. I really don't have the strength to do anything these days. I'm starting college later this year, and the plan was to live at home because it's not far away. But now I just want to leave. I'm not sure how though. I don't have enough savings or a job right now, and the thought of going out and getting one feels overwhelming. I don't want to drop out, but I want to go somewhere else. I wrote this yesterday because I needed to rant, but I didn't want to start an additional controversy. So it's anonymous. Comment her: if she is PLA, who was in college, she should proceed with the emancipation process. Emancipation will save her a fortune on her schooling. And I guarantee you that her horrible parents did not plan to benefit her in any way. Before all of this, I planned to attend college in my hometown. It's a terrific college downtown, and I was overjoyed to be accepted. A couple of my high school buddies are also going there and will live at home. I was saving to buy a car for simpler transportation, and they were going to pay for my tuition and other expenses. But now I simply want to leave this house. Commenter: stay strong. Do not let them get under your skin. Even if you have to find roommates or move in with a friend, depart as soon as you feel secure with your money. There are Facebook groups and other resources for finding roommates, particularly in college locations. I know that's what I should do. I have a buddy who is moving into a studio apartment near our campus, but I don't have a job right now and don't want to be a burden to her. She and I are close, so I am sure she would invite me to move in with her, but I don't want to be a burden. Also, I don't have a job right now, so I can't pay rent, which is something else I need to work out. Update 1. Thank you very much. A few days earlier, I couldn't get out of bed, and my family's comments had convinced me that I was to blame for all that had happened. But after seeing the answers to my article and all of your support, I felt reassured with my acts and thoughts for my family. I'm still dealing with feelings of guilt and melancholy, but anytime I start to spiral, I remember how much this community of strangers has supported me, and I try to calm myself down with your comments. Thanks to your opinion and suggestions, I finally decided to call my grandmother and tell her the whole thing. Before I continue, I should clarify that my grandmother, 77F, did not attend the wedding. I stated it in the comments, but I feel compelled to include it here as well. She lives a few states away and has mobility concerns, so she no longer travels. We went to see her around Easter, and she suggested that I read a poem during the wedding. But that was the last time I saw her in person before all of this. She has always been very affectionate to me and has previously chastised my parents for their favoritism. But she is unable to play a more active role in my upbringing because she lives so far away. I'm constantly apprehensive about troubling her because of her age and health. She had a mild stroke a few years ago and is now back to normal, but I'm still concerned. Anyway, I contacted her and explained everything about the wedding, even how my parents didn't even purchase me a ticket to accompany them. She came to the same conclusion as the majority of the commenters. It was simply unthinkable that they had forgotten and done it on purpose. I cried on the phone with her, explaining how I was feeling, how this had been going on forever, how I felt in the aftermath, and most importantly, my need to go. She was really lovely and soothing to me, telling me that I didn't have anything else to worry about because she had my back completely. She told me to take it easy, but make plans for the future, and she promised to help me. After that chat, which lasted around 2 hours, I felt better and decided to take her advice. I began working on a plan for the upcoming academic year. I have a friend who is going to rent a studio near our future campus. She has a wonderful relationship with her parents, but she has 5 younger siblings and wants to be more independent. So she opted to move out. I asked if I might live with her temporarily and pay rent as soon as I acquired a job. She immediately agreed and advised me not to worry about rent or anything else until I was in a better situation. We had a good cry together when I told her about my parents' wedding incident. This happened a few days ago, and I had planned to post an update at the time. However, my grandmother called my dad and siblings to chastise them on how they were treating me. My brother texted me later with a half-hearted apology, stating he didn't realize I wasn't included and simply assumed I wouldn't enjoy the vacation. He also accused me of uploading the photo solely to cause trouble. My sister, on the other hand, berated me, telling me that I kept making my problems public and blaming them on the family, although they were all innocent. My folks have been acting strangely since returning from their trip. They berated me and were outraged at first, but since then, we've just ignored each other. After my grandmother called them, they came into my room and told me that if I wanted to put this whole thing to rest, I needed to stop talking about it. They say it would have all been over if I'd only kept my mouth shut. I requested them to leave my room and contacted my grandmother again to explain what had transpired. She then told me that she and my uncle, my mother's older brother, had bought plane tickets to see me. I was honestly concerned about this because my grandmother's health isn't great, and this level of work is too much for her. I understand how difficult it is for her to get on a plane, so I attempted to discourage her from coming and assured her that everything would be fine. But she refused to listen, telling me that she was overdue for a chat with my parents and wanted to see me. I'm worried about her and feel like I pushed her to take this lengthy, difficult trip because of me. I want nothing more than to hug her right now, yet I'm concerned about her. At the very least, my uncle will accompany her, but I hope she does not overwork herself or that nothing bad happens to her, because that would shatter me. They arrive tomorrow and haven't notified my parents about their vacation. My grandmother begged me to keep it a secret until she arrived. I'm hoping she'll be able to persuade my parents of the error in their ways, or at the very least, assist me in breaking the news to them that I'll be moving out shortly and intend to maintain no contact. I'm concerned about her having to do so much for me and troubling her, but I also admire and love her for everything she does. Update 2. Many people have messaged me and commented on the post, and I haven't had time to answer to anyone until today, so I apologize. You've all been so kind and caring, and it's been genuinely eye-opening and horrifying to realize how many people have experienced similar stories of neglect and abuse. I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to send some kind thoughts to this online stranger. This update will be lengthy, so I apologize in advance. I'll just resume where I left off. My grandmother called to say she was coming here to see me and help me out. I was quite concerned since my grandmother has a difficult time traveling, so taking this trip would put her under a lot of stress. And I felt responsible for her because I was the one who contacted her. She came early Monday morning with my uncle, and I went to pick her up at the airport. Not going to lie, it was an extremely powerful and emotional experience. As soon as I saw her, I went to her arms and burst into tears. I'm not sure if I could tell her anything because I was crying so hard. I had so many things to say. Thank you for coming, for being so kind to me, and for having my back. I regret forcing you to take this vacation. I feel terrible at home. I'm not sure if my parents love me, but I know you do. Am I an affair child? When I saw her, I was struck by all of this, as well as remorse and fear. But she hugged me tightly in her arms and assured me that everything would be fine. My uncle hugged us as well. I'm not sure how long we stayed like this, but it must have been a while before my uncle urged us to get going. We got a taxi and proceeded to their hotel. My grandmother had watery eyes, and I could feel her heavy breathing, which terrified me. Yet she hugged me and smiled the entire time. She had rented a double room for me to stay with her for those days. And once they were settled in and I was calmer, we sat down, and I poured my heart out to them. Years of neglect, emotional abuse. How horrible I felt after the wedding, but also how I had felt for years. I stated how my parents were attempting to make me feel guilty for everything that had happened, and how terrified I was about my future. But that my number one priority was to get out of the house, even if it meant sacrificing my academics. I informed them that I had made plans to move in with a buddy and was seeking work. I also told them about this post and how several people assumed I was an affair child, and I admitted that I was starting to doubt that myself. It was a lot, and I could tell they were both deeply touched by what I was saying. But they continued to soothe me and make me feel safe enough to open up. After I expressed my anxieties, my grandmother reassured me that I had nothing to worry about, and that she would always be there for me. First, she assured me that I was not an affair child. She informed me that both of my parents were overjoyed when my mother became pregnant with me, and she knew that adultery would be a deal breaker for my mother, as she imagined it would be for my father. Apparently, the favoritism started when I was 3 or 4 years old, when my parents were continually complaining about having a young child in the family. They were frustrated because they could transport my older siblings to their activities, but not me. I was also quite shy and a bit of a crybaby, which they could not tolerate, setting me apart from my siblings. She told me that my parents had saved more than enough for my college. They're pretty wealthy, so that had never been an issue for me, despite my recent concern that they could take the funds away from me. She told me that if they ever tried to refuse to pay for my education, she would handle it, and she would not allow me to drop out due to financial constraints. She also offered to help me with rent and an allowance so that I could move out. She was quite giving, and I thanked her, but I also mentioned that this experience had been eye-opening. I had no idea how wealthy I had been monetarily my entire life. Despite their flaws, my parents have spoiled me financially. I attended private school, received a huge monthly allowance, and owned a car for years, and they never complained about my expenses. Seeing the experiences presented here made me understand how fortunate I was, and how relying on them put me vulnerable to losing everything. I told her that I wanted to be independent, not just from my parents, but from everyone. I feel as if I need to learn to stand on my own. To be honest, writing this and reading the experiences of individuals in truly bad situations makes me feel like a spoiled brat my entire life. My grandmother demanded I take her assistance until I no longer needed it, and I accepted. But I still want to look for work and try to make it on my own. We relaxed at the hotel for a bit because we were all tired from the morning, but in the afternoon, we took a cab to my place. When I stepped through the door, my parents were completely surprised to see my grandmother and uncle with me. Before they could say anything, my grandmother urged me to go pack my basics while they spoke with my parents. I rushed upstairs and overheard my grandmother and uncle berating my parents for everything they had put me through. At first, I could hear my parents defending themselves, but they finally quieted down. When I arrived downstairs with 2 suitcases and a backpack containing my most crucial belongings, they were all in the living room. My father turned crimson red, and my mother sobbed like a kid. When she spotted me, she stretched her arms toward me, apologizing, but I simply responded, "Save it," in the coldest tone I could conjure. My father told me I didn't have to be a jerk, and both my uncle and grandmother ordered him to stop up. I exited the premises at that point and waited for the cab outside. Back at the motel, my grandmother told me that I would not have to return to them. She informed me that my parents had never questioned my college tuition and had intended to throw me an elaborate birthday party to compensate for the wedding fiasco. They even planned to give me a car as an apology for everything. But my grandmother was having none of it because it was evident to her that they were just attempting to save face. She believed they were making these decisions on the fly, and that a party and a car wouldn't compensate for everything they had put me through. My mother's heart apparently broke when my grandmother informed her that I had even questioned my paternity. My mother burst into tears, but my grandmother informed her that given their actions, what more could they expect after constantly excluding me from family functions since I was a child? My grandmother said she would make sure they made the payments for my school unless I decided to cut relations with them and have her pay till I could pay for myself. I asked her to do that. I felt horrible since I didn't believe it was her obligation, but I really don't want anything else from my parents anymore. Although my grandmother is very well off, she is not as affluent as my parents. But she informed me that everything was okay and that whatever went to me would be deducted from my mother's inheritance. The next day, I went with my buddy, her parents, and my grandmother to inspect the studio where we planned to relocate. When my grandmother arrived, she said, "Absolutely not." I knew from the photographs that the studio was small and dusty, but when we discovered water damage and mildew in the bathroom and kitchen, as well as rust on the old equipment, it was evident that it wasn't livable. I was aware of all of this previously and thought I could deal with it for a time. But what really changed our minds was when the grown-ups pointed out that the studio was street level in a terrible neighborhood, in a building that didn't appear particularly safe. There were bullet holes on the walls, which I had not noticed until my friend's father pointed them out. Grandma and my friend's parents offered to help us find an apartment in a better area and cover the fees. Both my friend and I want to be self-sufficient, but we realize that with potential minimum wage employment in such a high-demand region, we would be unable to get anything better on our own. So the plan is to hunt for a 2-bedroom apartment, and my buddy and I will pay what we intended for the studio, with her parents and my grandmother covering the rest. I know I'm still spoiled to anticipate aid from my grandmother, but after seeing the studio in person, I honestly wouldn't have felt secure there. My friend's parents, who were aware of what I was going through, invited me to live with them until we found a suitable apartment, for which I am really thankful. I've been staying in the motel with Granny since she leaves in a few days. Apparently my friend, her parents, and my grandmother discussed this before coming to me to ensure I had a safe place to stay until we moved into the apartment, which has yet to be discovered. I teared up as I thanked them, seeing how many people had rallied around me to give assistance. Since then, I've started moving some of my belongings from my parents' house and setting up my space at a friend's. Every time I return, my mother cries and apologizes, and my father has also apologized. But I stay distant and cold toward them. My sister called to say her mother was a wreck and that I was a D-back for what I had done. Before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked her. I was about to block my brother as well, but I noticed he had sent me a very long message in which he apologized repeatedly for all he had done and for not comprehending how horribly our parents treated me. He stated he had been doing a lot of self-reflection since Grandma called and realized he was mistaken in presuming I wasn't on the trip because I didn't want to go. He also regretted allowing our parents to exclude me for so many years. I replied briefly, thanking him for his thoughts, but stating that I need space and am not ready to accept his apology just yet. I believe he is sincere because he has never been mean to me in the same manner that my sister has, only distant. However, I feel compelled to keep him at a distance for the time being. Keeping in touch with my family feels like the correct thing to do while everything is still so new. Maybe in the future he will show me that he is just as vicious as everyone else, and I will block him. However, as long as he respects my boundaries, I feel better not cutting him off totally. I've also scheduled an appointment with a therapist who specializes in neglected teenagers, and my first preliminary consultation is next week, which will be sponsored by my grandmother. This makes me even more eager to get a job to relieve her of the load, despite the fact that she has repeatedly stated that she is willing to do everything for me. That's where things are right now. I'm not sure if I'll blog again. Maybe after I start classes or move into my apartment, but for now, I'm just trying to spend time with my grandmother and uncle. I'm working on learning to grow and overcoming the feelings of guilt and depression that have haunted me for so long. I'd like to thank this community again for being so nice and helpful to me. To everyone who has messaged me with their own personal stories of being kicked out or having to make it on your own at such a young age, you have made me feel a lot less alone. You've also shown me that things can improve if I work hard for them. I feel lucky because I have such an incredible support system in my grandmother, uncle, and buddy. But you're right, reaching out has been the finest move I could have made. Opening out about my sentiments to those that love me, as well as all of my internet pals, has genuinely saved my life. So thank you. I am more appreciative than words can describe. Commenter, I'm curious. When you returned to collect your belongings, what exactly did your folks say? Whoopee. Every time I've gone there, my mother has been crying and saying I'm sorry again and again. But I haven't talked to her, so she hasn't expressed anything in particular. I also haven't given her a chance. My father has largely remained silent, staring at me whenever I enter and depart. When he apologized, he said something along the lines of, I'm sorry for everything without acknowledging any fault on his part. I'm not sure if they're shocked by all that's going on. I'm overwhelmed and haven't had time to digest it all, or if they don't believe they've done anything wrong and are simply acting for grandma. I honestly do not know. Commenter, don't chop off your nose to spite your face when it comes to college money. Your parents are responsible for paying the entire bill. Don't burden yourself with that expense when they can cover it. It's the absolute minimum they can do. OP. My grandmother has already told me that it is unacceptable for me not to attend college simply because my parents will not pay. And she will not allow me to take out student loans either. I asked if she would co-sign, and she flatly refused, saying she'd rather pay herself than see me upset about money. I will not sacrifice my education because of my parents, but I will take advantage of this opportunity with my grandmother. I'd rather not receive money from my parents because I know they'll hold it over me for the rest of my life, as if I owed them. I'm really fortunate that my grandmother will take care of this, even though I feel I don't deserve her. Commenter, I hope you don't feel bad for coming from a wealthy family. You are not privileged. You appear to be more self-aware than many others from your upbringing. Working and living separately from your family will allow you to explore the world. I honestly don't believe you're a pampered, affluent child. Working for what we need develops character and teaches us a variety of skills, including how to deal with tough people, the value of each hour and dollar earned, collaboration, societal institutions, and more. I'm pleased you have a safety net with your grandmother, and don't listen to anyone who would judge you for it. Many of us live paycheck to paycheck, and I would not want that on anyone just starting out in life. If you ever want to give us an update on how things are doing, I will absolutely read it. Thank you for sharing this terrible period in your life. OOP. I feel more than guilty, angry at my heritage, and how ignorant I've been my entire life about my privileges. This self-awareness you stated has only recently come to light for me. When I initially clashed with my parents, I didn't think about money or how I'd support myself. That's always been a given for me, which is wonderful, considering I'm still under 18. But after posting here and reading posts from others who have had to deal with the financial ramifications of being neglected, cutting off their family, or leaving home at an early age, I realized how out of touch I had been. After my dad remarried, he neglected me and prioritized his new family, making me feel like a guest in his home. Am I the jerk for resenting him? When I was younger, I had a great relationship with my father. My parents split when I was an infant, although I spent the week with my mother and weekends with my father. My father and I were like best friends, and we had a set schedule every weekend. We'd grab 5 red box DVDs to watch over the weekend, go fishing, play soccer, and bike to a hidden playground near the zoo. I was also used to my father constantly having different girlfriends, none of whom lasted more than 2 weeks. The only one who stayed longer was a woman I admired, who was there for 2 years. She left my father when I was 10. Despite this, my relationship with my father remained unchanged until I was 12, when he met his current wife. This woman had 2 children, one older and one younger than myself. They moved into my father's apartment after just 2 weeks. My room was already small, but my tiny mattress and 3 small plastic drawers were pushed into the corner to make way for my daughter's bunk bed and dresser. Before I knew it, they began putting my bed in a closet while I wasn't present, and frequently forgot to take it out when I came to visit. When my father moved into a larger house, the older sister received her own room, whereas I had to share one with the younger sister every weekend. The 3 small drawers I had were quickly reduced to just one because my younger sister wanted the other 2 for toys. I gradually began to visit my father less frequently. Things got extremely bad when my father got his girlfriend pregnant. After a year, they married, and I had no idea for a month because he hadn't told me. I also had no idea my newborn half-sister was born until weeks after she returned home from the hospital. To make his new family happy, my father began indulging them and stopped paying child support to me and my mother. His non-working wife cooks, cleans, and shops, while my father pays for her older daughter's college tuition. The younger daughter is the epitome of a 10-year-old Sephora child. My half-sister is still a toddler, but she is plainly spoiled and hates the word no. My father and I had a routine that is no longer in place. My stepfather has been with my mother since I was 5. Apparently, though I don't remember it, I once called him Dad, and as a result, my father told me not to love him like a father, since he isn't my father. I believe this is why I began acting as if I despised my stepfather. I had no idea why I felt that way toward him, because he has always been nothing but nice to me. In recent years, I've felt considerably closer to him. He feels like the father my biological father should be. Over time, my father began to treat me differently. He rants to me about his political opinions, conspiracy theories regarding aliens, and other topics. He also boasts about his new business and family. If I try to share anything with him, he gets upset and shuts me down, instead continuing with his own story. It appears that he now considers me a friend, rather than his daughter. In recent years, I've learned that my parents' divorce wasn't because they weren't compatible, but because my father cheated on my mother while visiting his family in Canada. I'm now 15 years old, and have changed drastically from the person my birth father remembers. I used to enjoy the beach and soccer, but now I prefer music, reading, and writing. Since 2022, I have written and published 2 books, and I am currently working on the 3rd in my series. My stepfather believes in my dreams, and loves me so much that he brags about me to friends and family, referring to me as his daughter. He also has a biological daughter, who I adore like a true sister, but she lives up north with her boyfriend, so I don't see her very frequently. Nonetheless, I adore them more than my biological father and half-sister, with whom I'm actually linked. My father blames me for not phoning him, but given how he has treated me recently, I don't feel like I owe him that. I also go months without seeing him anymore, since I no longer feel at ease in that place, especially because the bed I sleep on is actually their guest bed. I am a guest at my birth father's house. Because of this, I resent my father. I haven't informed anyone how I feel, so no one is calling me a jerk, but I'm wondering if I am. My father appears content with his new family, and I'm left wondering whether it's terrible that I'm not glad for him. Am I the jerk? Update 1. Hello. I wrote a post a few months ago about how my father has stopped treating me as his daughter, now that he has a new family. Not much has changed since then, but here's an update nevertheless. Since my initial post, I've only been to my father's place once. It's safe to say that I'm just an uncomfortable guest in their house. I should begin by mentioning that whenever I go a few months without visiting, my father attempts to appear innocent. He phones me every Friday to inquire when he should pick me up. I never answer because he always calls while I'm in class or studying, so he phones my mother. But because he never asks in advance, I usually have plans on weekends with my cousins, friends, or just writing. As I am still working on my 3rd novel, which requires a lot of focus that I can't get at his house. Actually, I'm just going to name him Eric. He hasn't been much of a father figure to me, unlike my stepfather. Anyway, my mother decided I'd go over to his house, despite the fact that Eric hasn't paid child support in over 2 years, and I despise coming there. My mother suggests that I pay him a visit every now and then to keep him out of trouble with the courts. She sometimes confuses me, claiming he's a deadbeat, but also that he's a loving father who deserves to be respected. However, given the circumstances, I'm very convinced nothing would have changed, because I seldom visit him, and he doesn't pay child support anyhow. In instance, one Christmas, he purchased and wrapped a large number of new items for his family. When I was visiting him a few weeks before Christmas, he drove to Walmart to get his wife some food. He handed me $200 and said, "Merry Christmas, buy yourself something, and the rest can be used for child support or whatever." I purchased 2 books, but the remainder of the money, which was supposed to be child support, was far from what he owed. I've told my mother that I'd be happy if he lost custody of me and my stepfather adopted me, but she feels that's too severe, saying, "He's still your father. He deserves your respect and love." Now it was the weekend, and I paid him a visit. From the moment Eric picked me up, he only talked about his new family. He discussed the older sister and her boyfriend, the younger sister and her shopping, and my half-sister, who can now speak a little. I remained mute until he asked me about school. When I responded, he became upset and launched into a conspiracy theory rant. I ignored him for the rest of the drive. The rest of the weekend wasn't any better. The older sister did what she always does when I visit. She locked herself in her room, and only came out when I left the home, or went to the bathroom to avoid having to talk to me. The younger sister had a friend over, and her friend threw her belongings on my bed, and sat on it, because that is where she sleeps when she has sleepovers. Eric's wife did a bad job of concealing her displeasure with my presence. She was often taken aback by my presence, because Eric had not informed her in advance, so she couldn't argue. Eric spent most of the weekend taking me and my half-sister to a playground where she could run around with her friends. I sat on a seat to read, but I didn't have much time for myself, because Eric kept leaving and telling me to keep an eye on my half-sister, who is a wild and fussy child. I am not a babysitter, and while I am wonderful with children, that doesn't mean I relish devoting my own time to caring for them when they are not my duty. I had to spend 2 days in either utter commotion or discomfort, and I told my mother that I didn't want to go over there anymore. She said everything was all right, and that she would not force me to leave, but I don't believe her, because she has said it before. I don't have someone to talk to about it, and the whole scenario is freaking me out. I don't recall my father ever being as happy as he is today, yet I still feel like I should be glad for him. I don't know what to do, so any guidance would be appreciated. Everyone who posted on my last article claimed I'm not a jerk, and Eric isn't acting like a father should. But he still reaches out from time to time, and calls me his baby girl, whom he adores. I almost cry when he says that, because it reminds me of how we used to be. Am I overthinking this, or overreacting? What shall I do? Am I a jerk for not being pleased for my father? You should inform your mother that the more she compels you to go to your father's, the worse your relationship with her will get, because she is not listening to what you want or how you feel. You should also tell her that you no longer trust what she says, because she has previously stated that she will not force you to leave, but she does anyway. If you can't talk to your mother, talk to your stepfather about it, and see if he can help. Update 2. Hello everyone. It's only been a few days since I last posted. Since then, I followed most of your advice and spoken with my mother about not wanting to be compelled to visit Eric, my sperm donor, as most of you referred to him. Long story short, I'm not certain she won't keep sending me over to Eric's place, but she did end up sending him long texts, chastising him for not treating me properly and ordering him to step up and pay child support. He didn't respond to her, so I took some other advice and sent him a lengthy text outlining how I felt about his treatment of me over the prior few years. As soon as I sent the text, he called to shout at me. He called me spoiled and overdramatic, stating it's my fault we don't have a relationship because I don't visit or communicate with him anymore, and because I cited the unpaid child support, he accused me of merely asking for money. I almost sobbed throughout that phone call and ended up hanging up on him. He also wrote some angry text to my mother, but later that day, he left a voicemail on my phone saying, "Money is so tight for me right now. I'm completely broke. You are aware of my feelings for you, correct?" The trouble is, I know it's a lie, since I always see my younger stepsister posting TikTok videos showing off the Sephora and other expensive items. Dad gets her. I believe I'm done trying. Some of you suggested I seek my stepfather for help. I wish I could, but when I asked my mother again if he could adopt me, she replied something that broke me completely. Apparently, my stepfather has stated that he does not feel he should adopt me. My stepfather is really nice and compassionate, but he is also incredibly non-confrontational, and he believes that adopting me would be a slap in the face to Eric. Also, to clear up any confusion from the comments on my last update, my parents' divorce was not due to his current wife. My parents separated when I was a baby, and Eric resided in Canada, where he moved from woman to girlfriend before moving here. When I was 12, Dad met and knocked up his wife, Alejandra, and married her without informing me until a month after their courthouse wedding. In case you're wondering, my age is 15. It feels silly that I'm experiencing this level of stress at my age, and I don't feel comfortable discussing it with anyone. I can't talk to my stepfather since he's usually working, and when he comes home, my mother is also around, which I dislike talking to. She often tells me I'm too young to feel the way I do. The last time I attempted to address my mental health with Mom, I asked if I could begin therapy, and she said therapists are stupid, and I should simply talk to her, or pray to God if something was wrong. I'm not religious, and discussing serious issues with her makes me very uncomfortable. It's not that I don't love her. After all, she's my mother, but she's quite intense and scary. My father has not contacted me again after his voicemail. Frankly, I don't want to think about him for a long time. If he suddenly understands how severely he has messed up with me and apologizes, maybe I will try to repair our connection. My stepfather may not wish to adopt me, but he still refers to me as his daughter rather than simply his stepdaughter. And I actually feel loved by him. I adore his parents like they are my own grandparents, and his entire family is kind and loving. I might post another update if anything else happens, but for now, I'm going to concentrate on school and my books. Maybe now that I understand Eric no longer cares about me, I can finally focus on writing my third novel. I dedicated my first book to him, and I do not regret it. I dedicated that work to the father he once was. It's unlikely he'll ever read it, because he doesn't think it's sensible for me to want to be a writer. But I don't care. I'm done. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and assured me that I wasn't a jerk. Update 3. There were so many individuals asking identical questions that it was overwhelming, so I didn't react to any of them immediately. But first, I'll answer those queries before moving on to the real cause for this update. A number of you suggested that I talk to a school counselor or whatever. The trouble is, I do virtual homeschool, and my mother works from home a lot. So I'm honestly too terrified to try it. Plus, even if I talk to my counselor without my mother present, I don't trust adults to keep such things private. I know that seems silly and worrisome, but it's just how my mind works. A number of you also suggested that I bring up the therapy issue with my mother again, but I know it won't work. My mother does not believe in treatment and feels that praying to God or having her preach the Bible to me will resolve everything. As for my stepfather, I adore him and see him as my genuine father, even if he refuses to adopt me. But he is also no help with the treatment issue, because he constantly agrees with anything my mother says to avoid arguments. But I'm doing well right now, and I believe things will improve soon. I believe this because I am confident that my mother will eventually petition for sole custody and court-ordered child support. When my parents split, they arranged for custody and child support amongst themselves. The agreement was that I would spend weekends with my father, and he would pay my mother $100 per week. I believe my father just kept that commitment to keep himself looking nice until he could complete his legalization procedure in the United States. As he was a Canadian immigrant, when he was legalized, he stopped paying child support and began indulging his new family. Anyway, I visited my father's place last weekend. This time, my mother did not compel me, and I chose to go because I wanted to give my father one final chance. He took me up from my mother's place, and we weren't even down the block when we started fighting. I was excitedly telling him about my business idea of making book boxes and selling books with DIY necklaces and hand-painted bookmarks that match the book covers. He called my concept dumb, unprofitable, and a waste of money and time. It was an hour's trip to his place, and he became political or upset at everything I said. When I told him I was thinking about applying to institutions like Harvard or the University of Chicago in the future, he became enraged about all the dangerous Cuban and Mexican immigrants in Chicago. He also claimed that Harvard is a waste of time and only famous because rich people go there. I ended up roaring back at him, telling him that he couldn't be so arrogant about non-white immigrants when he was once an immigrant himself. Also, I've never understood why my father is so bigoted toward Hispanics, despite the fact that both my mother and his current wife are Latina. He went on one rant after another, and I was so tired of it that, instead of remaining silent like I usually do, I objected. Because of this, my father spent the entire weekend talking about my bad attitude. I told my mom about everything. I believe the final nail in the coffin that prompted my mother to seek sole custody was when I informed her about my father's rant about the differences between men and women. I ended up memorizing and writing down everything he said, then texting it to my mother. I implored her not to talk to him about it, but she was furious with him. Here's some of what he said. 99% of women want to latch on to rich men. Nearly all women are greedy and unloyal. Men don't like successful and independent women because they're prideful and bossy. It's more important for a wife to respect her husband than for him to respect her. Or, it's wrong for wives to make more than their husbands. And so much more. He smiled and added, but you're the exception, pretty girl. There was so much more that happened just last weekend, such as him saying that some of my guy friends aren't real men because they're gay, and attempting to convince me that my summer volunteering opportunity in the Dominican Republic is a bad idea because the people there are different, despite the fact that my mother's family is from there. I won't go into every annoying thing he did, but I'm finally done. This was his final chance, and he wasted it. I simply wanted to mention that I'm quite sure my mother isn't sending me over there anymore. She spent the entire morning looking for my birth certificate, wondering if she needed it for court. She wants full custody, and if my father paid child support, it would greatly assist me prepare for college. He currently owes a significant amount of child support. Also, I didn't include the names of my books in the postings, because I didn't want a bunch of internet strangers to see my social media tags on the back of the book, but I will share the titles with anyone who directly messages me. If anything else happens, I'll most likely post another update. Hopefully, my next report will come after we've been to court. You are not the jerk. Divorce and parenting are difficult. Your biological father sounds like a jerk. He's entirely failing you. I understand why your mother and stepfather want you to establish a relationship with your biological father. It is one of the things parents are urged to do throughout divorce, because it is usually better for the children. If your parents obtained a court order granting your biological father weekend visitation, your mother could face legal consequences if you did not visit him. Your stepfather cannot adopt you unless your biological father's parental rights are dissolved by a court. And if your biological father challenges it, things will get messy. Your stepfather's reluctance to undertake such a legal struggle while you are still considered a minor makes sense. I'd wager that it has nothing to do with his affections for you. He expresses his affection for you and your position in his heart every day. He is already your father, so you don't need him to adopt you. Please do not let his fears about the legal situation make you believe he loves you any less. I'm delighted your mother is going for both full custody and child support. Your biological father has to be held accountable. I am so sad that you lost your biological father. He may be alive, but he is no longer the parent he once was. However, keep in mind that you played no part in this. He's just focusing all of his energy on the woman who, let's say, meets his physical wants and leaving it at that. It's a regrettably prevalent issue. Ex-wife who cheated and abandoned her family shows up years later with another man's child, begging for a second chance. What should I do? Some background here. I, 37 male, and Angela, 36, my ex-wife, had met in our mid-20s. We met when I was about 24, and we were employed by the same company. We were married after 2 years of dating, and 3 years into our marriage. We had 2 kids, now 9 and 7 years old. Though I had told her it would be good with me if she did, I didn't want to put her through anything she didn't want. Hence, the second pregnancy was unexpected, and she wasn't happy about it. She didn't kill it either. Things were still wonderful between us, and we were as in love as we could have following our first daughter. After the second pregnancy, though, that changed. She started to get rather irritated, sullen, and started to pick on our eldest or me consistently. Just realizing this was due to all the hormones, I tried to reconcile with this new Angela. After some time, we believed this would change. Instead, things just became worse. Around her, my daughter and I learned to walk on eggshells. She was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom, but I was running everything. After our first child, she had quit her job of her own volition and done all the housework, along with looking after our eldest, while I worked till she fell pregnant for the second time. She claimed she was too weary to take care of our children and the house. Hence, we had to get a maid while she was pregnant. I consented, even though it was only somewhat outside our means, since at the time I wasn't making enough. Especially considering Angela's pregnancy, I wanted not to trouble her too much. After our second daughter was born, I thought she would come back tending to the house and children throughout the day. Let me also state clearly that I was not among those men who neglected household chores. Though I was tired from working, I did anything I could to help out after returning from my job. I assumed she would take some time to heal after she delivered our younger daughter, but then we would go back to our regular life. Still, several months passed, and she showed no change. She refused to help out around the house and stayed exactly as angry and agitated. She would simply spend all day seated at home watching TV. She hardly engaged in any activities with the children either. She would periodically pay our neighbor to drive them to the park. Though I wouldn't want to come across as hostile, I did feel that way as I was working day and night while she wouldn't even do the minimum at home. Additionally, proving somewhat costly for me to pay for a maid to do all the cooking, cleaning and other domestic tasks was, along with all the other bills, I had to look after and wanted to preserve money for our daughter's futures. Angela refused to assist me in any kind, hence that was practically impossible. After around 6 months following the birth of our younger daughter, I realized we could not continue like this and had to speak with Angela, knowing this would be a challenging conversation. So I requested my parents to watch our girls for the day. They agreed. That day, I sat Angela down and told her I realized she was fatigued with 2 pregnancies, but I needed her to assist me and coordinate with me. I told her that we were finding a maid to be too costly, and I needed her to respect her word and return to at least some of the housework so we may renegotiate and cut the housekeeper's pay to save some money. She claimed she was too busy watching the children to handle any of the housework, so she turned down the proposal right away. She also advised me to start making more instead of justifying our financial condition by pointing out her guilt. Although I attempted to persuade her, I was already doing my best. If we were to make this marriage work, she needed to help too. I also mentioned how, from what I knew, she simply let the children watch television with her for hours, while she watched tacky reality TV, neglecting their needs. The housekeeping had remarked to me casually this as well. She flared up and accused me of spying on her through the maid. So I quickly understood that bringing this up was a big mistake, saying she was done being pushed about by me and forced to do all the labor, while I purportedly did nothing except sit at a desk for a few hours each day. She went on a rant against me, claiming I should be the man of the house. She then chastised me for asking her to help and blamed me for not being able to pay a maid. While I was the rational one expecting her to help the house, her charges were utterly nonsensical, and she was merely grabbing at straws to give the impression that her not doing anything all day was normal. We finally got into a huge argument, and she labeled me a loser, unable to afford to be with a woman like her. Given how terrified our eldest daughter was of her, I responded by accusing her of being a lazy cow who had already failed at being a good mother. Now she was failing as a wife too. That comment definitely spoke to her, and she pushed me hard. I stumbled, fell back on the coffee table, broke the glass, and hurt myself. I had to get hurried to the ER. She continued to apologize and weep all through, but fortunately, my back was only mildly injured. She had to move out. I told her I no longer trusted her. Around the children, I couldn't trust her either, as I had no idea when she could lose her fury once more and damage them as well. While Angela was still living, I urged our parents to look after our daughters. She kept protesting for a week, pledging she would never let something like that happen once more. But I couldn't believe her. She begged me to give her another chance. I almost filed for divorce. By the conclusion of the week, we decided she would receive therapy and go live with her parents for some period. I would let her move back in with us only once she had been vetted by a medical professional. She was willing to work on it and improve. Thus clearly something was quite wrong with her, since happy individuals do not act that way. I also wanted my girls to have their mother. Hence I chose not to divorce her just yet and give our marriage another go. While we were living apart, we also began marriage counseling. But ultimately, it proved to be ineffective. She turned out to be cheating on me. Angela was living with her folks when my parents came in to help with my girls. We attended weekly marriage counseling sessions, and for some time, things looked to be improving. Her therapist contacted me as well. She informed me she had postpartum depression, but was improving. Anger problems had been one of her symptoms. She had never had them before, but they became very out of hand when she pushed me. For both of us, that woke us awake. This continued for about a year and around 6 months in there. I even let her visit our girls under my direction. It delighted me to watch her gradually returning to her old self. At last, our circumstances seemed better, and we could really make it work. She then abruptly quit showing up for our counseling appointments, without giving any reason though. She stopped answering me as well. But given her therapist kept me informed, I knew she was progressing. It did not make sense to me. I persisted in attempting to talk to her for weeks, but she would simply blow me off, claiming she needed some alone time. At last, after almost 3 months of her avoiding me, I paid her a visit at her parents' house. Her parents disliked me and blamed me for her actions. Thus, I hadn't done that previously. They thought I was the one who had driven their daughter insane and produced such behavior. Angela had advised me it would be better if I skipped seeing her while she was living with them, since it would simply cause more drama. The last thing we wanted. She had been acting aloof and skipping counseling appointments. Hence, I disregarded that guideline and paid them nevertheless. She seemed indifferent, even when she did sporadically come up, and I simply could not understand it. She insisted everything was good, whether I tried personally speaking with her, on the phone, or even by text. But her behavior made it abundantly evident she was hiding something from me. When I arrived at her parents' place, I thought she would be there, but she wasn't. Her parents slammed the door in my face when I asked where she was, and said they were not permitted to tell me. I had a nasty feeling about it, since I could tell they were loving the circumstances. So standing before their house, I made the decision to phone Angela. My paranoia was developing as I tried phoning her several times, but she didn't answer. Desperate, I resolved to try to go inside myself by slipping around the house. Knowing her parents typically kept the kitchen door open, I headed around to the backyard. But I didn't have to travel that far, since Angela was seated on a swing in the backyard. The bad news was that she was making out with a man I didn't know. Not alone, because that was the most terrible event of my life. That instant is etched in my head. The man went away as soon as he noticed me, and by the time Angela looked around, I was already headed back to my car. I was in total shock. Hence, she caught up with me and tried to stop me, but I was not hearing anything she was saying. I shook her off and warned her not to touch me when she tried to grab me. She neglected. Thus, I got in my automobile and headed home. I told my parents I wanted them to hire a lawyer for me and blocked Angela everywhere as soon as I got home so she wouldn't have an opportunity to explain. When I paid Angela's parents a visit, I told them of what I had recently seen. She never contacted me once again until we had to visit the court-appointed mediator for our divorce settlement. By then, I had essentially become a robot, totally shut off emotionally, but driven only for the benefit of my girls. Even when I learned Angela was entering her parental rights, I felt nothing. She had decided she wanted to be with the guy, let's call him Sean, who I saw her with, instead of with us. He was her friend from childhood. Although they had drifted apart during high school, they got back together when she moved back home with her parents. Apparently, she had developed feelings for him. Her parents apparently encouraged this. Hence, it's likely why they didn't object to her kissing him in their backyard, even though she is a married woman with 2 kids. Apparently, they had always wanted her to wind up with Sean, and they were glad. Angela was at last choosing herself and her own happiness, as if she had ever been capable of doing anything other than that. She wanted to qualify for alimony, hence the divorce was a protracted procedure even though she had been cheating on me. Though it took some time, my attorney and I battled valiantly to ensure she received nothing in the divorce. Since I had been the one paying for everything while she watched TV at home, it was all rightly mine. The divorce was finalized 5 years ago, and we were successful in ensuring she left empty-handed. Though I knew I couldn't break, since I had to look after my girls, who had nobody but me. The months I spent handling the divorce were some of the toughest periods I had. I can never enough thank my parents for being there for me when I balanced job and childcare. They are quite helpful and supportive. 5 years have gone by, and although at first the divorce seemed like the worst thing that could happen to me, I am glad for it today. Had I not chosen to leave Angela, I do not see myself where I am right now. Since then, life has given me good treatment. In every sense, I am in a far better place. We moved into a larger house, since I make more now, and I have no more responsibility for anyone except my girls. Although they live nearby, my parents only pay occasional visits. My daughters are as delighted as could be, and I have friends that love me. All a man needs is that. I am so grateful to the universe that everything is working for me. At least, it was until Angela reappeared a few days ago. The doorbell rang when the children were at school, and I was ready to head off to work. Angela was outside, standing with a boy less than 3 or 4 years old at her side. This has to be Angela's son, I knew. Her standing at my door startled me, and I was still processing it when she started crying. She came here, she informed me, to atone and right things with me. She declared she was at last ready to be a family once more and offer our marriage another shot. She was returning after all these years, eager to give our marriage another try, as if it were up to her to make that choice. It still astounds me. I chose in a short second to shut the door and turn her away since I wanted to avoid whatever this was. I informed her earlier that this was no longer her family. The day she broke off contact with Sean, I had stopped being her husband. She had given up custody of her daughter, hence she had no right to speak to us as her family. The divorce was only a legal requirement. I closed the door after saying that and instructed her to go as I wanted her nowhere close to my property. Though I was very furious and could have cursed her as well, I held back since the small child made me hesitate. For a few minutes after I closed her out, I could hear her crying outside my door. I chose to ignore it. I headed off to work once I confirmed the coast was free. I tried very hard not to think about it as I couldn't afford to let it happen, and it would only sap my will. I nearly forgot that Angela had even shown up at my house. But as soon as I got back from work, my parents called me asking why I had sent her away. Angela had been heartbroken. They told me, having contacted them following my closing of the door on her, since she was in the process of divorcing Sean, and at last had an opportunity to make things right with me. My parents disclosed they were the ones who had provided her my new address and urged her to visit me. They informed me Angela had contacted them roughly 1 month ago, and that this had been under development for some time. My parents thought it was about time I considered my children, since my daughters deserved a mother, and in their view, Angela was the best mother available. They thus determined she deserved another shot and sent her my address and with guidance on what to say to me. I took great offense at them, not even asking if I would be comfortable with it. It was not their position to pardon her or determine she deserved another shot. If the children had been home, it may have been quite dangerous, so their pulling of something like this was reckless. They denied that they had made a mistake even as I corrected them. They claimed they had an equal right to decide what was best for the girls, since they had taken care of the kids and aided me during my divorce. They also said they still periodically look after them. They thought it pointless whether or not I wanted to fix things with Angela, since they had influence in the situation as well. Their belief in that seemed ludicrous to me. My daughters are mine, not hers at the end of the day. Although I value my parents, and will always be appreciative of what they did during the divorce, I do not believe it was their place to let Angela re-enter my life. We argued a little, but they felt that by not giving Angela another opportunity, I was the one acting selfishly. They assured me they had done their due research, and she was a different woman now, deserving of living with my girls. They claimed it was offensive to consider they would endanger my girls, or me, even when I informed them she had signed her rights away, being too conceited to realize that my daughters needed their mother. They said I was destroying their life. It has been a couple days now, and I do not believe I was selfish or out of line. I have given this much thought. Update 1. Angela arrived up to my home with her son approximately a week ago, and lately I learned the truth about her connection with her parents. Since I'm still trying to understand it personally, and I, honestly, find it so upsetting not even knowing where to start. How all of them have deceived me without thinking twice is unbelievable. Apparently, my parents had been in communication with Angela all along, in addition to telling her my new address. After the divorce, I cut her off from my life, but they hadn't, since they thought she would visit at some time. They hardly spoke, just once a month perhaps, but that was plenty for me to feel cheated from. After Angela was handed the divorce papers, Sean had Angela sign away her rights. He had set her an ultimatum: either keep in contact with her children and battle for custody, therefore leaving him behind, or ditch her family and establish a new life with him. According to my parents, she had had a tough decision. She chose Sean and opted to start a new family with him rather than remain with the one she already knew. Angela had contacted her parents soon after I filed for divorce to explain her circumstances and request their assistance, since she still wanted to keep intimate contact with her children. She said she felt driven into a position by both Sean pushing her to completely forsake her children and me advocating for full custody with supervised visits. Her prospects of obtaining partial custody were low even if she battled for custody, and opposed Sean because of the circumstances of our divorce and her history of anger management problems. Her time and money seemed wasted fighting for custody. Should she choose to battle, she had a very real risk losing Sean and custody of our girls in the end. My parents entered at that point. Angela visited with them individually and essentially begged them to let her keep contact with our girls. She asked them to be a link between her and the children, thereby helping her out. Angela understood she would lose any visitation rights once she signed away her parental rights. As their grandparents, my parents intended to take advantage of their visiting rights, though. By going behind my back to let Angela meet our girls, they effectively misled me for years. Saying Angela's plight resonated with them, they explained their behavior as they couldn't, in good conscience, keep a mother apart from her children. Still, stabbing their own son in the rear seemed to have no effect on their conscience at all. They acknowledged that Angela would be invited over and allowed to spend time with them anytime I left the children off at their place. My parents would pay my daughters toys and candy to be quiet. Hence, they never told me they were seeing their mother. My girls would tell me they played games with their grandparents, and their friend, anytime I asked what they had done at their grandparents' house. I always assumed they were referring to my parents' real friends, whom I already knew. But apparently my parents had told my daughters to call their mother the friend should I ask about their day. Although I couldn't believe my girls had been lying to me. I pardoned them since Angela and my parents had obviously coerced and threatened them into silence. It's only for kids. I asked my daughters whether they had been meeting their mother behind my back once I found the truth out from my parents. They began to cry and informed me they felt they would be punished by God should they say anything. So they were unable to say anything. Angela and my dad have to have really hammered it into their minds that telling me the truth would have disastrous results. They had been so evasive and covert all along for this reason, for never asking my girls which of their parents' friends they had been seeing. I also felt like a bad father. I never would have known. It could have been someone deadly simply. But since I'm receiving a restraining order against all of them, I am ending this right now. Since my parents emailed me confessing everything following our argument, I already had written evidence. They thought the email would help me to frustration, to be a mother to her daughters, while juggling her relationship with Sean. Though all it accomplished was to prove they were all lying to me, and I couldn't trust anyone anymore. They believed it would make me forgive everyone involved. Angela signed away her parental rights and had to sneak about to meet the children like it was a crime. All because Sean wanted her to have no contact with her former family, which is ironic. Originally meant to be her one true love. All of it was for nothing, as they are divorcing. Though according to my parents, Sean now wants nothing to do with any of them. They even had a son together. Angela didn't want to depart, since their son had just begun kindergarten, and she had started working again. He got a job offer and is leaving in a few months. Their arguments had been getting more intense for some time. 3 months ago, Sean told her he was done and headed off to accept the job. Though all this disclosure did was make me feel as though justice had at last been done. It was meant to make me sorry for Angela. My attorney has already advised me. The petition for restraining orders has been filed. My daughters and I have also had a decent conversation on everything. I warned them they would never see their mother or grandparents once again going forward. They seem good right now, but we are still working through it in therapy, since I know this will be challenging for them. For the past 5 years, they most certainly have found it difficult. This ends immediately. Update 2. Hi everyone. I greatly appreciate all the attention and help. I truly appreciate all the wonderful blessings and messages directed towards my girls. Angela and my parents should show up in court in a few days. They have been issued restraining orders. I have blocked them on every platform. Thus, I have no idea how they feel about any of this. I have also advised friends not to talk to them should they try to get in touch. I have been working from home for the past few days and have added security around my place. I told the school where my girls go. I first wanted not to send the children to school for a few days, but I wanted their education not to suffer as a result. Their teachers are now monitoring them. None save me is permitted to pick them up after school. Things have so far been nice. I hope they will keep away once the restraining orders are issued. Update 3. Hello. Here is a brief update. But we obtained restraining orders. Angela, my parents, and Sean have to keep their distance from me and my girls for the next 5 years. Else, they will suffer major penalties. The previous time I saw them, they appeared really hostile. Hence, I am maintaining all the security precautions for a period since I want to avoid any risk. Regular family counseling sessions are attended by my daughters and me. I think we will make great progress in the next months. To be honest, we have already advanced really much. Right now, I just want my daughters to be happy. That is all. Kindly keep forwarding us your best wishes. We really need them.